Good evening. I'm sorry, I'm looking up in the sky trying to remember what today's date is. Welcome to the April, thank you, 25th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, as folks will see, we are wishing our village manager well in her recovery from a brief illness, hopefully brief, and we're going to move on without her. She's left updates with both Jamie and Stuart, so we'll be able to cover most of what we had intended at tonight's meeting, and we do, as always, have an interesting agenda. But let's get started with any announcements folks have. Sure, Deputy Mayor.
Sure, it's all about the music for me. Tomorrow night is another Organ Groove Thursday at the Elks Lodge, and looking forward to Paul and John and a guitar player that will arrive at around 7 o'clock, and they will start to play jazz and blues and little R&B. That's starting at 7 o'clock. There'll be 2 sets. Again, that's at the Elks Lodge, and on Saturday night, it's more jazz, the Dave Kane Trio. Dave Kane, very dynamic, young composer. I think he's got 6 CDs of original material, and he'll be playing some of his original works as well as jazz standards. And that's also at the Elks Lodge at 7:30, and that's 118 Croton Avenue. Thanks. Bye.
Great. Trustee Bazemore, did you have your hand raised? Anyone else with announcements?
Yes.
Please.
I just wanted to put on the record and congratulate Trinity Episcopal Church. They just kicked off their 150th anniversary, and I was there with some folks from the town board, and it was a beautiful event. They had an evensong choral concert. It was pretty nice. But particularly why I'm bringing up that particular church here is because that's one of the institutions that has really served and continues to serve Ossining when it comes to hosting our shelter, hosting our food pantry, hosting Alcoholic Anonymous, hosting other programs and services, in addition to their actual mission of, their church and religious life and such. They serve, I would say, quite a few, couple thousand people a year. And they opened their doors just recently for the mobilization of grassroots efforts when it comes to community organizing and local issues, county issues. So I just want to say thank you, and congratulations to 150 years. That's quite a accomplishment. So, and this, I was just with a meeting with Trustee Levin on Monday, right?
I'm waiting to hear what we were in the meeting about.
Richard Wishney Park meeting.
Yes.
So, and we were talking
I was
about.
scared there for a second.
Well, I only met with you once this week, so. Since I was little, and Trustee Bazemore can agree, we used to have a active Ossining parent come into Ossining schools, dressed up as a garbage pan that said "stash of trash" on it, and every year they would have about 100 students throughout the schools come and pick up garbage throughout the streets, and it would end with the whole project and in celebration. And I'm so happy that our new Superintendent of Parks and Recreation Department, Bill Garrison, is relaunching a tradition that has lived in our village for years. And that's going to be held on May 5th. It's community-wide, and all you have to do is show up between 8:30 and 12 noon, pick up gloves, trash bags, and register the area that you want to clean. I have some suggestions if you need some. And but for more information, just call the rec center, and see you May 5th.
To pick up.
Oh, great. Okay.
I don't know if everybody heard that.
So you can come on May 4th to the community center to pick up the gloves and anything else that you
there we
need
go.
and sign up. And I assume it's like 9 to something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's 8:30 to noon each day.
Oh,
And
8:30
then
to
also, if you have an area that you want, you can sign up for it. But if you have no idea where you want to go, then they'll make some recommendations.
Right.
Thank you.
I didn't see in the email, is he going to be there, do you know? Bill, the superintendent? Because he's new to the village. And
I know
it'll
he'll be
an
there
oppor-
on Friday. I
Okay, it's
don't
an
know-
opportunity for people to meet him.
I'll make mention of that to him.
Yeah, that'll be
Okay,
great.
No problem.
Great. All right. So I have some village government-y things, and then I have one community calendaring thing. But I'll start by mentioning on the same day as our Stash the Trash, which is our local effort, is the Riverkeeper Sweep, which is a regional effort. And there are two programs, two of the areas that Riverkeeper Sweep is focusing on are in the village. And one of them is really a project that is a partnership with our Department of Public Works, which is stormwater drain stenciling. So if you want to learn more about that, there's all kinds of opportunities, I guess, on May 5th to do good things for cleaning up our environment. So check out the riverkeeper.org to learn more about that. I also want to remind folks that the school board elections and budget vote is coming up. The vote is on May 15th, and the vote, I assume it's still at OHS, right? I mean, that's the one time a year when you go to the high school, no matter where you live. If you live in the school district and you're a voter, please go to Ossining High School to vote on May 15th. And there are actually, I believe, 4 candidates for 2 Board of Education seats. And there is a debate among the candidates coming up. I believe it's Monday the 5th. Is that correct? At the library. I want to say it's at 7 o'clock. So go to the Ossining Union Free School District website to get all the details on that. But it should be a nice opportunity to learn about the folks who are seeking election to the school board. And I want to say, this is truly village business. Thank you to Lynn Brooks Ovney for the last 2 years that she has served in our planning department and served the village. And we wish her the very best of luck. She's going to be moving on at the end of the month. And we wish her all the best in what's next for her. Meanwhile, Debbie is working with Tanya in our personnel office to update the job description and how that department may be organized a little differently going forward. It looks like at least one of the positions does not have it only has 2 folks on the list, which means that we have more flexibility in who we might hire, is what it looks like. So we'll wait to hear more details on that from Debbie and from Tanya, and that'll be coming in the next few days. So good luck, Lynn, and for anybody interested in planning positions, keep your eye on the village website, and we'll be putting out more information to let folks know about that posting. And we had spoken at a meeting this winter about ways that we might be able to engage the public in more forums. And so one of the suggestions actually came from Debbie. It was a forum that they used in a community that she served in Ohio, they called it like a citizens forum or something. But she participated, the mayor participated. In that case, their whole city board participated. But it seems like what we're recommending, what our plan is to go forward, is Debbie and I and one other trustee to participate in a community forum. And it'll be not in a village hall. We'll be going to different neighborhoods in the community in hopes that folks who are connected to whatever neighborhood we're in will be that much more likely to come out. It's not a decision-making occasion. It's not a formal board meeting. It's just an opportunity for people to come. There's no shot clock. You don't have to sign in. It's not a televised occasion. It's got to be more, the intention is to be more relaxed and more welcoming. And so it's going to be held at 6:30 in the evening, 6:30 to 8. And the first one will be at Star of Bethlehem Church. We just confirmed that, and we're looking at a couple of other locations for July. So the first one is June 7th. It's the first Thursday of the month at 6:30 p.m. And we encourage folks to come out to that. We'll be promoting it further as the date gets a little bit closer. It is up on the village website now. And mark your calendars for something, taking my village mayor hat off for a moment, and welcoming you to the this month's Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series screening. The film is an inconvenient sequel. It will take place at, as always, at the Boudars Theater, and it is free to the public. It begins at 6:30. It's a really engaging film, and a terrific panel discussion will be taking place afterwards. So we encourage you to join us on Friday the 27th at the library at 6:30 p.m. All right. Stuart, you wanna do the honors of kicking off our meeting here?
Happy to, Mayor. Thank you. Our first topic tonight is with our Superintendent of Water and Sewer, Andrew Teese, regarding the Hazen and Sawyer contract regarding the New York City Department of Environmental Protection Demand Management Plan. Andy?
Good evening, Mayor and Board.
Evening.
Give a little history here. Back in 2016, the village entered into agreement with New York City on a water demand management plan. This was a plan that anybody who was north of New York City that purchased water that was less than the 11th largest user, we were number 11, would get money towards a grant, which we will receive $288,000. Back then, we scoped out how that money should be spent, and New York City gave us some ideas, and one of the ideas was a toilet replacement program, which New York City agreed to pay $100,000, which would be 500 toilets to village residents. It's a $200 voucher that's towards that toilet replacement. You could pick whoever you want to install it. You can install it yourself, but there'll be a whole process. And the vouchers, the village manager has been in touch with the local plumbing supply, Rim Plumbing, so that they can buy it locally. And there are toilets that are less than $200 that you could use that voucher towards, or you could buy a $400 toilet and pay the additional $200. It's all depending on what you want for your house. The key is New York City. When I started 25 years ago in the water industry, New York City used about 2 billion gallons a day of water, and they reduced their consumption in total to 1 billion gallons. And part of it was this toilet replacement program. They've replaced over 1 million toilets, and they still have this program ongoing. So we're kind of mimicking that same program. It's a little bit different. And basically, in front of you, this is just something that we worked up in our office. We kind of mimicked what they were saying. Are you eligible? And the key is you're a property owner. You have a single or two-family house, owner occupied, at least on one part of it. That's going to be a board decision to how many toilets you'll allow for the residents. If we have 500 toilets, do you want to give out 2 per household, 1 per household? I don't know how popular it's going to be. I ran the numbers. It's the right thing to do, but we ran the numbers, and just if 500 toilets were replaced in the village, we'd save 7.3 million gallons a year. And it's quite a bit of water. And from New York City's numbers, they're talking about you can save up to 40 gallons per day per toilet. So it's for you to look at. We're going to finalize it before it goes out to the public. And New York City has to approve this, too. They have to make sure, obviously, they're funding this, so they'll have to do it once over. But our goal is to get it out as soon as possible. So the Hazen and Sawyer contract, it's a $36,000 demand management program oversight with us. There's 5 parts to this contract. It's a $36,000 contract. It's a 4-year program, and they broke it down into component analysis, real losses in our systems, water loss assessment, leak detection, pressure management, leak line repair, indoor voucher program, and the annual reports that are required by DEP. It's pretty onerous. The quarterly reports, they broke down the cost here, so I think it's well worth using them for this process. We're doing quite a bit of work in-house. There's a lot of paperwork involved with this, but it is $288,000, so it's a good amount of money for the village.
The $288,000, that's for the whole grant.
That's for the whole grant,
That
so
is for these fixture.
yeah, like the original. So we broke it down to about 100,000 for the toilets, and then the upgrades themselves, like to the distribution system, was going to be like 40,000 in leak detection. And out of that 40,000, we're using noise loggers out in the system ourselves, which we put these noise loggers out every day, and it tells us if there's a problem between point A and point B and you might have a leak. We're going to double that effort by buying double the amount of equipment. That's like 20,000. Using their correlation equipment, which is a service, and then using $140,000 towards the next water main replacement project, which is that water main that was losing 400,000 gallons a day by 9A. So that project's next year. So that's kind of perfect timing for that.
So how much is left over for the toilets? 100,000, you said?
100,000, 500, $200 vouchers. So it's kind of it's your
Because
decision.
how do we distribute those? is the
Exactly. So that's
question. And that just goes towards the toilet, doesn't go towards the actual installation. of
Correct.
that You have to pay extra for.
you'll have to pay for. And my thinking was 2 toilets per household, because then if you're paying a plumber there to mobilize and show up, it's not much more to install another one. It's a better bang for the buck, but that's up to you guys.
I know this was a very successful program in New York City. Are there other communities that have had the toilet fixture replacement program as part of their demand reduction?
Not on the East Coast, as far as I can see, and we're the first one that's actually doing this for New York City.
Great.
So
I'm glad to hear that, because I know we were the first one to get the study done and have the report come out, and that report was really helpful in getting us, you mentioned the noise loggers that we already put in, and has been very helpful.
It's helped
in
us.
finding some significant leaks to tighten up our system, which has been really valuable to everybody in the water system. I guess my I understand the logic of what you're saying is once you're paying for a plumber to come in, you're paying them a similar rate whether they're doing 1 toilet or 2. But with 500 toilets and, what do we have, 6,000 housing units in the village? I just, if we do 2, some houses don't have 2 toilets, but, so they would obviously only need 1. I guess the question is, like you said, you don't know how popular it's gonna be, but if
I
it is
don't.
popular, if we're doing 2 per household, then that's half as many households that might be able to take advantage of the program and save anything. I don't know, that's my initial reaction, but I'm just seeing this for the first time right now. Anybody else?
Okay.
Well, I mean, I would just say that, I would try to give it to as many people as possible. And I
Okay.
think that would be if people have 2 toilets and one of them's, a low volume flush, that's, that house is gonna use less water, so, and the more houses that are using less water, that's the better for the system and just better for the planet, so that would be my thought.
So then if it's a single family home, obviously 1. If it's a 2-family house, owner occupied, 1 for each side.
1 for each unit, that makes sense.
Makes sense.
And we can hope that somebody, if they have the ability, if they're paying for the plumber to come in anyway, they'll use the voucher for 1, and maybe they'll buy a second low-flow toilet and just take advantage of having the plumber there. We can't obviously legislate that, but any other thoughts on the best way to move forward with this?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to talk because you don't know the demand. So maybe a lottery system of some sort, because at least, it's at least fair. And if very few people want it, they'll all win, with a time slot, right? And if many people want it, you sort of, I would say, that's probably the fairest way to do it. I would assume the oldest homes probably need it the most, right? So the oldest toilets are the least efficient ones, correct?
Anything above 1.6 gallons per flush. So
Right.
yeah, the older ones, some are over 3.
I mean, those are my initial, without thinking it through, kind of.
So you're making the point that because there's a finite amount of toilets, we don't know what the response is gonna be.
Right.
We don't.
And rather than having it be a first come, first serve, whoever the first 500 people are that happen to hear about it, if there's 1,000 people that respond, yeah, there's a logic to that. And then if only 400 people respond, then they all get it and we keep promoting it, right?
And I ran the numbers. If you're based on our water rates, if it's what New York City says, 40 gallons per day per toilet, that's $162 a year. So the plumber's cost has got to be close to that, for the time it's going to take. So it's like a 1-year payback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be much less, but it's not. So it's good for us.
So, when we do roll this out, is there a plan for how people, sign up for it?
Yeah, actually, Jamie's going to be heading up the website, but Chris from our office, she came up with this whole plan, and there's just a couple of things we needed to fill out with the limits per toilet. We need to set up a email address with Craig, and then New York City will get back to me pretty quick from what they're telling me, you know, after they review this to make sure this is okay. So I'm thinking it's going to happen pretty fast.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, no, because I was gonna follow up on something you're saying when we're talking about doing the lottery. That would kind of change the way that this was
Right.
originally conceived.
I haven't read the whole thing, yeah.
So how the program works, you submit documents online or in person, and there's like 5 steps, like you do a copy of your bill, and you know, submit pictures of your old toilets that need to be replaced, and then there's so.
Well, maybe the initial, part of this would just be, the gathering of the list, so we figure things out from there, right? I mean, we're not gonna, it's not on a first come, first served, right?
Interested homeowners.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Property.
Yeah, because there's going to be a whole process of making sure that the person's eligible. So it's not like it's
Step one is the eligibility process, they have to
What makes
provide
you not eligible?
like
Your toilet type, right?
or
So-
if you can't prove that you're the owner of the house
Oh,
and you're a renter, and
I see,
or you can't prove to us that it's actually your bathroom.
got it.
You know, do you own a house in Mount
Oh, so
Kisco?
you take a picture of some other house that
Yeah,
you
so-
walked into, and
yeah, we just
You
we
want a free
just wanna-
toilet, you know?
yeah.
one would not think that's such a
So we're making it a lot of work for somebody to get their $200 free toilet especially if they're not legit, so.
Well, you don't have to decide now. Just
Well, no, I'd like to be able to move it forward, because we've been wanting to do this for a while, so.
I mean, this seems pretty, if my colleagues, the procedure is pretty simple to me, and it's step by step, and I don't see why, unless we have a substantial change that we want to make to this particular step or process.
So this would be first come, first served. So your only problem is if tons of people want it and then they get mad that they didn't know about it. I mean, that's the only issue. If not a lot of people want it, everybody will go away happy. It's fine. The only problem is on the other side if a whole bunch of people want it. And
One of
that's,
the reasons we went this way is this is the city's system.
oh, understood. I could see it's
We-
already
in other words-
preset.
No, I pointed out also because, as Andy pointed out, whatever we propose, the city has to approve. So if we put a lottery system together,
Ah,
has to
good
be
point.
something that the DEP has to okay. So whatever we put out, we just can't, in essence, come up with our own system.
Okay, so it's all about the timing and the communication so that people are aware that this is going on.
Definitely.
In that case. And, tell me again about RIM. I get the local. Are they the only supplier in the village?
I mean, they are in Ossining right now.
They are in
We
Austin.
called around, and they were the only
Really?
ones
Yeah.
who do that.
And we wanted to keep it local.
And I know the village manager had spoken to either the owner or the manager, and they can provide a toilet underneath that $200 range, which is great. So,
I just want to make sure the prices are, kept where they should be. I'm not going to use the word monopoly, but one person, one company, and I know RIM, it's fine, I'm just saying,
it was
I don't want it to seem like it's
Jamie?
one.
No, that's off.
I knew that.
It's not intuitive.
It's anti-intuitive.
Trying to look at the picture. So when we called around, Sophia had called from their office, and she had asked, and they had told her what the lowest price was. I think that Debbie was able to ask them to come down on a lower price because they'll be able to order a certain
Got it.
number of toilets before and get a discount and then pass that on to us. I think the hope is that if someone's redoing their toilet, maybe while they're at RIM, they order a sink, redo their bathroom. You don't
Well,
know.
but we're not recommending that.
We're
'cause
not, but
that's
it's,
That's their incentive to offer a
it's their
lower price on
incentive
the
to give
local
the,
toilet. Yes.
there's the bulk discount and then the incentive. So,
not. Okay.
so they said yes.
I'm fine with it as it's proposed here on this document.
This is great. It's not every day that we could offer, an opportunity for you to be efficient and help you in replacing an item in your home. So thank you.
no, thanks. It's perfect timing with the design of the filter plant, because we're exhausting every avenue we can to tighten up our system so we don't over-design the plant. It's perfect timing.
Right, and the update to this project is not just about toilets, there's also the other
The other
two-thirds
facets,
of the elements, right? Which
Yep.
is the upgrade.
upgrade the water system, the leak detection,
You'll update us
the
on that.
reports. I will.
Yeah, and I,
It's a big deal.
it is. The whole project, the whole grant, the fact that we were part of it is a big deal, and I'm really, really pleased. I don't know if folks realize how fortunate we are that we jumped on this. So thank you, Andy, for leading the effort to work with New York City to get these funds here. And it is really nice when a grant can be direct to the residents, direct to consumer, have a direct cash benefit right off the bat for homeowners in Austining. So I'm really pleased about that. So the next step would be for New York City to approve this plan, which is essentially their plan, so we expect it'll be smooth sailing. And then it's a matter of getting the word out on the website, in any of our web blasts. I'll put it in my Monday newsletter. We'll
Post
send it
it.
out to the press. Okay,
We'll blast it out.
okay.
I can just go back to the Hazen and Sawyer. Is it the sense of the board that I can have a resolution for next week which authorizes the village manager to enter into the agreement with Hazen and Sawyer for the $36,500 as part of the water demand program?
For administering this program?
Right. Well, not the toilet replacement program, but basically all the
Everything
paperwork
else.
coming with the water demand program.
Okay. They were the ones who got the grant
Yes.
for us correctly. Okay. Right. I'm comfortable with that.
Yep.
We'll know what it is when we see it on the agenda next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That's nice.
Second thing I have is an engineering proposal from Lynn Star Engineering. It's for the police station. This was in our capital plan for the last 5 years. Police station's coming up on 20 years. Last year, we had to replace the HVAC system in the courtroom as an emergency purchase. Everybody remembers that. And the other systems alike they're kind of just getting along. We've milked them out as far as replacing compressors, replacing equipment, outdoor coils, all kinds of stuff. So this proposal is for an engineering firm to come in and look at our existing system and then look at the latest technologies, which is it's higher SEER ratings, better equipment, but it's still cost effective for the police station, to prepare contract documents for bid specs. Now this job is for next year, it's not for this year, so we're way ahead of the schedule. But what we want to do is have them design the system and then bid this system in the winter when the prices are down. It's like 4 separate heating and air conditioning systems throughout the court. Well, not really the court, it's the court offices, and then throughout the police station. And that's it. So it's and construction management. I'll be there also, but it's a price of $24,700 for the design, the bid documents, and the construction administration, which is very reasonable for something that is probably going to be over $250,000. Less than 10%.
The $250,000, that's going to be the cost of the replacement?
Cost of replacement. Yeah, that's pulling all the existing equipment off the roof.
Or the-
I didn't add contingency to that, but we'll talk about a number, but it's pretty direct. They know what they're dealing with. They're not dealing with a building that's loaded with asbestos. They're dealing with something that was built 20 years ago, and the standard shouldn't be too much different than what's there. It's time for it. When you go on that roof, you can see like the ductwork itself, the insulation on the outside of the ductwork is delaminating. We're losing so much efficiency to outside air that units are running that should meet the demand faster, and that's energy that's being wasted. So I think we'll see a quick return on investment just on the energy side. So
It'll take a little while to get $250,000 return on their investment.
yeah, but it's there's a lot of upgrades to that system, and also the control systems themselves. This is also the control system. I failed to meet that. Like it's gonna use outdoor air to cool rooms instead of running the AC if it's 50 degrees out. Like it's a smart system. So, any questions?
It seems long overdue. My question is more, I guess, so since this is for next year, would this be part of like, would this be included, so the design, the administration, so the 24/7, would this be included in a capital improvement budget line for next year, or would the police be including it in their budget for next year? Or how does that work?
We would get a capital line established. Right now, it's just in the 5-year capital plan.
Okay.
But the finance office will establish a capital line that this would be charged to, and obviously we went out to bid, everything would be charged to it. So it would be charged to next year, and it would be borrowed right after bidding. And if the numbers came in way high, we'd rebid it. You know, it's like, just because we bid it doesn't mean we have to award it. And but it's the right thing to do to look ahead, to avoid the boiler that had to be replaced at the community center. You know, it's just that kind of a outlook.
Thank you. Any further questions on this? No?
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stuart?
Mayor, next will be a discussion of the ETPA housing vacancy study. I think you've all been provided by Debbie with 2 responses to the RFPs that were received. One from Collective for Community, Culture, and Environment, which is affiliated with the Pratt Institute, and the other from Elisa Sturdivant and Associates in Alexandria, Maryland. I'm going by Debbie's notes here, but I will answer whatever questions I can as well. The Collective for Community, Culture, and Environment, it's more local, obviously. They will be using Pratt Institute students to do a lot of the legwork and preparation work. There is a familiarity with the rent regulation system, both in New York City and in the area. If you look at, I think, Yvette Schiffman, who is the director, I believe that she worked for New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development for about 17 years, from the mid-'80s till 2002. Their intention is to do their initial contact by telephone. There will also be some on-site visits to make sure there's statistical validity to what they're doing. They've done work in Chinatown. They've also done work in other locations in New York State. 2 things that Debbie noted here, I guess sort of, if you want to call it yellow flags, I'm reading her writing. It's unknown if there's any bias with regard to these groups. And they've also done work, apparently on behalf of the real estate industry. But that may just simply be the work that's coming, into Pratt at that particular time. The folks whose resumes have been provided, all are in the area of planning. And as they said, they've done work within the city of New York, and that's the Collective. Ms. Sturdivant, who is out of state, has done studies both in New York and elsewhere on housing, impacts of rent controls. She has looked from both sides on the particular topic. This suspicion that I think Debbie was saying, and suspicion may not be the right word, is that she would probably have to learn somewhat about ETPA because she is, from Alexandria. But she has done, as I said, studies on housings and issues of rent control. And a couple of the papers that she was involved as an author, 1 or 2 did in fact involve studies within New York State. I should point out that these two RFPs, they were actually, the RFP was not sent to either of these two folks. In addition to the list of folks that the RFPs were sent to, it was also posted on the New York Metro chapter of the American Planning Association, where it's very likely that this was picked up. One of the possible reasons we didn't get more responses is this is the grant season for CFAs and other grants, and a lot of these entities to whom the RFPs were sent are basically involved with this up until August. So they may not have been able to do that. Both the Collective for Community, Culture, and Environment and Ms. Sturdivant are indicating that the work could be produced, I believe, in 2 months, which I think was what we had within our within the RFP. And there is, as you know, a price differential between the two as well.
How much of the price differential can be explained by the fact that the New York-based one is using, including some student hours for some of the labor?
It does include student hours, and I think also part of Ms. Sturdivant's time, there is a travel expense in there as well, because, but there is a, with regard to the collective, they're looking, or at least approximating, I think about 40 student hours with regard to this, so that they would be using students to assist them. So yes, they're using that. I did not see that on Ms. Sturdivant's, but she has other staff who she would be using to do the work.
So the decision tonight is which of these to recommend moving forward with? Any thoughts and opinions on that?
I'm fine with the recommendation from my village manager, that being Collective.
Which is the New York-based one.
That would be correct.
Do you understand the relationship between Pratt and this group? Because I saw the student hours, 40 hours, but generally when students are working on something, they don't get paid. But so I just got confused. I think it's more of a point of clarity, not which would I select, because it seemed like the selection of this group actually makes sense to me. But there's a couple of little pieces, like they do talk more than once about subcontracting, which always makes me uncomfortable because you get resumes, you talk about certain people, but then different people end up doing the work. So I've had negative, not in regards to this, but in general, so I'm more clarity about, like, I want to know that the people that are working on this are the 4 resumes that we looked at, not somebody else that's a part, because it's a cooperative collective, I guess. So it's a group of people managed by a central committee or a person, and we got the resumes, which is great. And the resumes resonated with me because they're different. You know, like you really sense that there are differences in qualifications. The relationship to the school is interesting to me because I'm not sure who owns this asset. The village should own this study. When a school is involved, oftentimes, the school has a right to some ownership. And so I just want to understand what's happening in a little bit more detail, but I still think it's the better of the 2 choices. I mean, I wish there was more being done in Westchester, not everything in New York City, but I can appreciate that this is actually a New York City legislation for so long that there would be more expertise there. It's just, it's a big city. Lots going on. So, you know, there's more of everything there. So those are the 2 things that I sort of circled for myself to have some more clarity.
I know that in the collective's response, they indicate that they would be using the services of the Pratt Institute Spatial Analysis and Visualization Initiative.
No, I got that.
As a sub-consultant. We'll find out what the exact relationship is between the 2. We'll
Detail.
inquire of Ms.
It's a
Schiffman.
detail, yeah. The subcontracting actually always concerns me a lot more than, you sort of lose control when you agree contractually to subcontractors, and just want to make sure we're getting what we think we're getting.
So are we all in agreement that we'd like Debbie and Stuart to look into some more of the details of how to work with Collective for Community, Culture, and Environment? And then I assume it would come up, Stuart, for a resolution?
Yes. Come up with a resolution, and then we'll just enter into the agreement with them, and they would be able to start.
So the resolution will be ready at next legislative session?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of responding to the inquiries that Trustee Levin had. I think that's just a matter of phone call, but we can have the resolution prepared and so that this can go out and get awarded to the collective.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
You know, I'm okay with the recommendation from our village manager. I at first, you know, I did see that she starred that area that said consultants, but then I'm happy that they actually listed who they would be, and that they're actually affiliates of the institute, which is already part of the overall study. So that was a little bit more sharing, which is good. So.
Good? All right. It sounds like the RUBA is actually an independent agency of the school, so they, like you said, they do have a
They're a
relationship. So
collective,
that's
they're not an institution. It's a cooperative.
right. Okay. I'm hearing a lot of consensus here, so please ask Debbie to look into the questions that were raised, but they seem like none of them are deal breakers, and we'll look forward to a resolution next week.
I shall.
Thank you.
Next topic is affordable housing. Further discussion of proposed local law 3, 2018. When the board last discussed this, which was at the March 11th work session, there was a decision to ask the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals for their comments with regard to proposed local law number 3. Planning Board met on March 27th and discussed the local law, and the Zoning Board met on April 10th. I have my notes here of what was discussed, and both meetings are online, so if anyone wants to see them, they're welcome to. They were both very engaged discussions by both boards with regard to this. One common thread from both boards was that operationally, whether this board decides to go to 20 and a 60% AMI, obviously it's this board's decision. The two boards were looking at it from more of a global perspective as to what is the impact of changing the percentages, and is there sufficient data. As I'll go into, in the view of the Planning Board, the lack of hard data to not only support a 20% AMI, or 20% set aside, I apologize, but as to whether or not even the current 10% set aside is in fact doing what it's supposed to do, causes them pause as to whether it is appropriate right now to go forward, only because the idea is they want to see the data. They were looking for where is the justification to do this, the warranted. Now they understand it's a board of trustees decision, but I'm relating it to you folks. And a number of members made this particular point. One member pointed out that while not opposed to the proposed revision, there's a concern that while the document is a good document, does it really help the individuals who it's really being designed to help if you're in fact changing it to 20% AMI, 20% set aside, and a 60% AMI? Are you actually benefiting that? The Planning Board was very much concerned with how this will, economically benefit the village. Will it have an impact with regard to development and developers, which is another issue when they brought up as to whether or not there is sufficient data, and I'll go back to that, to support that. There weren't a lot of questions from the Planning Board about the specific language in the proposed revision. It was, again, as I said, a more overall approach. One of the members said that you know, given that Ossining is not that large, it certainly would be fairly easy to make a determination as to how successful the affordable housing has been in Ossining since it was initially passed a few years back. Another suggested that this issue of the affordable housing and whether you want to look at changing of the figures may be something that's more appropriate for a comprehensive, as part of the comprehensive plan review. There was another suggestion that in terms of determining perhaps how effective affordable housing has been, that might be something that the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council could look at as a possibility. A number of members on the planning board said that they were looking more at proactive means of addressing the affordable housing issue. And the sense was that simply increasing your set-asides and decreasing your AMIs is not a proactive way. A number of members said they'd rather see the village have, the quote was used a number of times, skin in the game, so to speak. Be it a public-private partnership, do something with property that's out there. A number of the board members thought it was very important that in addition to dealing with affordable housing, that money be devoted to rehabilitating the housing stock that is in fact here. You know, in terms of a number of homes that are clearly in dangerous condition, and to try to help in that regard so that more individuals could have safer places to live. So that's that was significant, you know, what the discussion was. And as I said, one of the members came back and said, you know, they felt that they did not have data as to whether the current affordable housing system is helping more than it's hurting, and that they would, you know, really want to, you know, see, you know, that to come through. The zoning board was particularly concerned about the effective date of any revision. The phrase they used is, what do you do if an application is in the pipeline and then you change your ordinance? If someone has basically planned out his pro forma based upon you know, 10% set aside at 80% AMI, and during the process you up it to 2060, that would throw their figures off, and is that a proper thing to do? That can always be dealt with, obviously, in an ordinance in terms of, you know, what your effective date is, and if there is anything that, you know, is in the pipeline at that point. I should state, though, that the general rule is that the ordinance that's applied is the one in effect at the time the board makes the decision, not the time that the application is filed. So unless there is a special circumstance or a special factor, you go by what it is at the time ZBA planning or whatever makes the decision. There was some discussion by the zoning board about one particular part of the statute or the proposed revision where it indicated, if you recall, that the percentages of the affordable housing are to mimic the percentages of how the 1- and 2-bedroom units are split up in a building. And the revision has the language that those percentages are to be maintained unless the planning board believes that a change is warranted. That's there because I didn't get a sense from the board previously that there was a consensus as to whether that should stay or not. And I explained to the ZBA why that was there and what effectively that would mean. It could increase the number of 2 bedrooms if the board thought appropriate, or increase the number of 1 bedrooms if the board thought appropriate. There was also some discussion about the parking limitation, which we've had before with regard to certain of these affordable units, would only have to have 1 parking space in certain areas. So that was the substance. Also before the zoning board, there was obviously a discussion of the fact that this could result in more applications to them for area variances in the event that one is looking at an increase in density outside of the bulk requirements that are set forth in the code. And that was just, as I said before with the planning board, that's more an operational issue. So if this board determines it's 20%, they review it as if it's 20%, and then have to deal with the numbers as the applications come before them. But I thought both boards, as I said, were very much engaged. They had all read the provisions, so they were ready for the discussions. The planning board discussion was well over an hour, and it was and the zoning board took a while as well, and everybody participated. So I thought it was very helpful and was very useful to get their perspective, particularly from the folks on the planning board, because a lot of these projects, in fact, basically all of these projects, would have to come before the planning board, because other than a 1 or 2 bedroom requires planning board approval. So they're going to see these under any circumstances. So their thoughts were important in terms of getting their sense as to what this was. So that's what those two boards had to say about it.
I wish I were there, because honestly, this is sort of the longest, most detailed report I've ever gone from their meetings, because apparently lots of discussions. My head is, I'm just like sort of taking in some of this really great points. I mean, they're all good points. It's not, clearly they did a lot of reading and educating themselves before the conversation started.
And on the planning board, there are a number of members who have dealt with the affordable housing issues in various ways.
Right.
And that's where you got some of the members really just questioning the underpinnings of the affordable housing program to make sure that it is what it is. And, is there a reason that you're going up to 20%? As one of the members said, if you're going to 20%, you're assuming that the 10% has worked. And you need to do better. Do we know that that's the case? And do we know that 20% will, in fact, do what you want it to do? And what is it, in fact, that you want it to do? So I thought those were all fair questions that were asked.
Yeah, I guess I find it interesting that they're asking about, kind of the efficacy of the program. I mean, for those that qualify and, all the houses all the apartments are currently rented, there's certainly plenty of demand. I mean, if you talk to IFCA, they've got a list that's quite long. I think the Kevin Dworka study makes it very clear that there isn't enough housing available, and one of the reasons that I think this is important is that if there's going to be, there's no question that a lot of the solutions to the issues of affordable housing exist within the current stock, and I certainly understand that. But if we're going to have incremental construction of rental housing, then there needs to be more of a commitment to housing at the lower end of the economic spectrum, and that's the reason that I'm in support of this. I wasn't at the meeting. I guess I'll have to go look at the tape and see for myself. But there is a reason for this. There is a good reason to. I think one of the reasons that it's good to discuss this and maybe move on it now is because there aren't any large projects in the pipeline. There's not a lot of things right now that would be affected by this. There are ships that have already sold, and there's other things that are out there, but there's no other, there's nothing in the queue that I know of that would be potentially impacted by this. But it also talks about the sense of the board and the importance that we have, that I have for making sure we have a rental housing that's affordable.
Comments?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think that, I have to say thank you to the board that took time to read the proposal and take time out of their meeting to really go over and give feedback that we asked them to give. I think that we should have also, I can't assume that they all didn't read this, but we should have probably asked them to read the housing needs assessment as well.
I can tell you the planning board,
Did? Okay.
they knew it. in fact, they had it up
Feels
on their
like they did.
computers.
Yeah. No, because, when it comes to motive and intention and why we even did a housing needs assessment in the first place and,
They were, and understand this, they understand the need for affordable housing. They were coming at this from perhaps a different perspective, but they were certainly not, this was not a, we don't think we don't think affordable housing is not an idea. I think they were just looking at it from the perspective was different, and that may be because it's planning versus zoning, but they were very familiar. One member, in fact, if you watch the tape, was quoting liberally from Mr. Dworka's study. So they were quite familiar with it.
And my second point, which I think is relevant to really the whole conversation of all different types of housing, whether it's low income, market rate, workforce, luxury, is us accepting, because it is a fact, that Austening's average median income is about $63,000 a year versus the counties and nearby. As we want to try to be cognizant of the market, we also need to know who's here and what they're making. Right now, currently, if someone applies for an affordable housing unit at Avalon or at Harbor Square or at any other places that have the 10% set aside, would they even qualify? A lot right now won't, which is why they have to go to IFCA, go on a waiting list. So I just think that's pretty, it's a relevant thing.
Okay, but what is that? I'm not sure what your point is in relation
Need.
to these. I'm not sure what your point is relative to the comments of the two boards. So the reason there are separate boards and we don't make all the decisions is that people come at it. Well, they're supposed to come at it from different point of views. So are you asking what different point of views they have? Because I get your commentary, but I'm not sure what that has to do with these two specific boards. What are you asking? Like, I'm not sure where the connector is for what they're looking at, because they're going to look at all these, at all the buildings. They're assigned many of these. They're all citizens, right? So they're all
Absolutely.
just like us. They're all people that live here, and many of them have been doing this for a long time, and some not. They all have different expertise, and I found it interesting that they had asked questions that frankly I never asked, but they asked such different questions than we look at. But I would assume that that's what they're there for. Shockingly, they've asked so many more than we asked. So I'm trying to understand. I got what you said. I heard everything you said.
Yeah,
But what's the connection to what they were saying?
well, I think that us
Or
under.
asking, I should say.
Well, I wasn't commenting to ask, I was commenting just to comment. I think us knowing why the set aside even came to be in the first place, 10%, why the conversation has evolved over the years to this point that now we're even considering, regardless of whether we were having the ETPA discussion or not, which is a whole separate thing, regardless of whether we were, since intention, as valid as it was brought up, and need and evaluation of current and prospective policies, I think that the current realities of our economic disparities should be very, very relevant to the conversation. So I just wanted to make that point, that's all.
Were they making any suggestions, or you're just reiterating their questions? Honestly, I wish I were there, but I'd like to have the conversation with them, because I'm trying to understand part of what you're saying and part of what he's saying, but I feel like it's like a broken telephone game when I was a little girl, and I'm getting the pieces of information. That's what I'm trying to find, the connection.
They did not make a recommendation
Okay.
for two reasons. One, they understood that.
Stuart,
I'm
could you get
sorry.
your mic a little closer? It is on.
So unusual, Stuart.
Here we are.
Usually, we
Thank
all
you.
hear you.
Radio
Substituting
voice,
for.
thank you.
Okay. the sense from the boards was that whether this board decides to go 20% set aside and 60% AMI, they felt that really was not for them, because ultimately, if you do that, they have to act with whatever the code is. But they felt, and particularly the planning board, was of the view that they did not have what they thought was sufficient information to them to basically say, does this even work? Is this even warranted? The thought was that there are municipalities now which are in fact going away from the set-aside and looking for other ways to provide affordable housing, be it that there's a partnership with, public-private, where there's use of other properties. And a lot of these were suggested by various members on the planning board. And I think that's what it came down to more, is that they, understand if this board goes that direction, they go that direction, and they will do. But they wanted to, I think, ask the questions, which is, before you do it, do you have the information you need to do this? And I think that's where, particularly the planning board was concerned, and that was, I think, pretty much a universal among I think we had 6 of the 7 members there that night.
Wow.
Trustee Bazemore, did you want to come?
Yeah, so I think I definitely do appreciate some of the comments that were made. We have talked about this extensively starting in December, if not earlier, with respects to the affordability of the policy. There has been some thought that when increasing to 20% at the 60% AMI, that every developer was not going to fulfill the 20%, and that there would be some developers who chose to opt out. And that's why we increased our affordable housing fee, to actually address some of the deeper levels of affordability that is needed within the village. With respects to, has the affordable housing worked? We've had 10% set aside at 80% AMI, which is a policy that, statistically speaking, if the average income of Ossining is $6,500, a family of 4 would not be eligible for. So the reason for this policy is to actually get in line with average families of Ossining. With respects to what other communities are doing with respects to inclusionary zoning, we do know that a number of communities here in Westchester, and really a number of communities, I would like to say about 509 municipalities in the country, actually have an inclusionary zoning policy. I would ask you, did they make a suggestion? I'm pretty for certain that they might not have been so particular, but there is a reason that we have chosen to look at this policy, and I think there are 2 things that also jumped out to me. What do we wish to become, right? That was a question within some of the comments, and also just recognizing that the decision definitely falls at the feet of this board, and that is the power that we do have, and so it is ultimately going to be up to us.
Was there a conversation about the parking, the one parking? Because, since I've been a
Very
trustee, that has been just unbelievable to me that's how that works.
No, there was a little bit of discussion before the ZBA, but it really was not the topic of discussion before the planning board.
So, in the past week, I've spoken with members of both the ZBA and the Planning Board and about their conversations. And I regret that I didn't put in writing. I don't know that they watched our meeting when we've had these conversations. We've had a number of them. But when we requested, and it was actually me that requested the feedback from these 2 land use boards, I regret that I didn't put in writing some of the specific questions that I had, because they didn't necessarily respond to the particular questions that we had raised. But as Rika pointed out, they did ask very different questions that we hadn't considered, and obviously their questions and their experience is informed by them not just being village residents, but by their sitting on these land use boards and talking to developers and seeing the projects that are coming through and what they're looking to accomplish. In response to your question, you said a couple of times, I wish I were there. And we can watch it on TV, but that's still different than being there and having the conversation. And that was what was asked of one of the newer planning board members when I was speaking with him, was, does the village board ever have joint meetings with the planning board? And I said, well, you know what, in the 6 years I've been in office, we've done it twice. The first time was just planning, zoning, and village board, and we did it here. And then the next time it was some additional boards beyond that, and we did it at the community center. So then I spoke with Joe Clark and I spoke with Debbie about the idea of doing a joint board meeting with planning, zoning, village board. We could expand it more than that if we want to, but those are the ones that would really have the most hands-on experience with any affordable housing policy. And we have booked the June and July work sessions at the library. Just looking at you to confirm. And that gives us a nice big space. So Joe Clark would like it, and I think it's a good idea, if we would have one of our work sessions dedicated to being the focus of the discussion being the affordable housing policy with the land use boards. And I think it would be helpful if we invite in a facilitator for that meeting who's really an expert on affordable housing, so we can, as we look at the terms of the affordable housing policy that we're considering, as was brought up in many conversations, is could our policy be something beyond set-asides? Set-asides is part of it. Could it be beyond that to reach perhaps to folks beyond that are at the lower than the 60% area median income? We have a little bit of that for the very large developments. Right now, I think the primary goal would be for us to take advantage of the experience and expertise of the folks on these land use boards who see development from a different perspective than we do. And I also would have questions, Stuart, you mentioned how we would apply to things that are in the queue. There are things in the queue right now. We have, well, Hudson Steps and Built, they do have a approved plan. They have a approved site plan, but then we've got the Brandreth Pill Factory property, which is actually going through the land use
That's in the planning board at
boards
this
and
stage.
planning
yeah.
board. And so I think that we probably need to be aware of what is in the pipeline and what that looks like, and make an informed decision on when the trigger moment should be, as far as, is it the moment that the decision is made by any land use, any village board or land use board that about a development, which would mean that anybody who's been going through the process to this point hadn't been anticipating that, and we're not as familiar with things that happen in the land use board as they are, obviously. So I would like to suggest that our next step in this policy be to schedule one of our upcoming work sessions at the library to be a joint board meeting with all of the boards,
What's the date?
where our focus, well, the second and fourth Wednesdays of June and July.
That's the 13th or 27th,
So
or July.
that's a great suggestion. However, there is, from the comments that you gave, Stuart, I am not, I was expecting more of, a nitty-gritty, actually looking at the individual details, talking about setbacks and densities and some of the historical projects that we've seen. What you presented was, very general comments. And then I'm also concerned with us waiting, right? Like if there is something in the queue that again is more affordable housing that is not meeting the need of the community, and that is not going with the recommendations by our housing needs assessment. I understand, and I'm very much aware who's on our planning board and some ideas that some of our members have on the planning board, and when it comes to affordable housing, my whole thought has never been to create, this inclusionary zoning policy is not the end-all, be-all, but it is a piece, right? We can talk about private and public partnerships. We could decide tomorrow to take every village property, call up New York State Community Renewal, and say, hey, we want affordable housing there. And that's what we want to do. And that kind of suggestion is outside the scope of the inclusionary zoning policy, right? When we're talking about development, though, we we still have zoning maps, right? We're not form-based. When we're talking about updating our comprehensive plan, we're not looking at doing a major overhaul of our zoning. That hasn't been the intentions or the conversations. So I don't want to get into a situation where we're having this grandiose picture, but then we're creating more affordable housing that's not meeting the need. I mean, it's a great suggestion. It is something that we can do, in conjunction with our comprehensive plan. I'm definitely, the person who made the comment that says, I feel like this is more of a comprehensive plan conversation. That's a valid point, and that is something that we've anticipated from the beginning. I would rather move forward because if, we don't want the conversations, unless what we're saying is we want to do a moratorium, right, until we figure out our affordable housing policy, right? See now that's ensuring that as we develop, that we're actually very intentional about saying we want to build housing that actually meets the needs of the community. So now, moratorium, Mayor Garrity?
So funny that you mentioned that, because I had a conversation earlier this week, actually, with Lynn in conjunction with her departure, where we talked about a moratorium. And she gave me more insight into it than I had ever been aware of, because it can be done in the way that you're suggesting, in a very short term, like 6-month period, and then if you want to have an extension, you can. But really, New York State has a lot of limitations on how long a moratorium can be. And I don't know enough to say it's a great idea or not. I think I'd be interested in finding out if it makes sense to have a short-term hold, so that we can figure out how we want to move forward with an affordable housing policy, and then who and when and how it would take effect.
Yeah, so those are my general comments. If we are going to, we've talked about this. So some of the questions that they raise, is this meeting the need? That's the reason we changed our affordable housing fees. There's some of us on the board who have been to enough affordable housing conversations to understand that inclusionary zoning has been something that has been pushed out by our PACE land use school. It is some of the best practices. It is something that has produced the most affordable housing on a local level in the last 40 years. This came out of Montgomery County, Maryland. I mean, this is something that municipalities have been doing. If we have grander ideas, I'm in support of that. If we want to look at already existing units and talk about accessory apartments, I've stated that before, but for the purposes of this conversation and this inclusionary zoning policy, I think it's important that we move forward. I think we can continue to have those conversations, because if there are things in the pipeline, as Stuart said, the minute it becomes effective, that is what it is. I'm very much committed to making sure that we actually ensure housing for the people in our community. I do not have a problem with luxury apartments as long as people of Ossining are included. These new units are $22, $23, $24, $25, $2,700. These are mortgages. Yes, we are creating housing. Yes, we are answering the demand of the New York City housing crisis. Yes, we're doing all that. Yes, we are reviving our communities, but there has to be a point where we draw a line in the sand and say that we are actually committed to providing affordable housing at a greater affordability. And we have to do it now. Like we've been talking about this for more than 2 years. I'm fine with the conversation, but when we start getting into the grander details, because I've asked to get into the details. Now we can get to the details all day. I mean, we could call a special meeting. We can meet a whole week for 3 hours. But I strongly feel that we need to move, that we don't need to, we can have more meetings with the planning board. We can bring in a facilitator. We might even decide that we want to, instead of just doing the planning board, we might actually want to do our comprehensive plan all at the same time during the summertime. Have a public engagement. I'm fine for the ideas, but I definitely believe we just need to draw a line in the sand today, if not yesterday.
Well, if you're talking about a moratorium, which we've never talked about, and so it's tough to just know what the best way is to go forward with that, because it's not a simple process. I mean, it may be very simple, but it's not something that we've looked into a lot. And I frankly had been just philosophically opposed to it, and Lynn kind of opened my eyes to how it might, in a very selective, narrow way, be beneficial for us, especially when we're looking to make a big change like this that would impact properties in the queue and properties that are soon going to be in the queue. So I'd like to understand that better and see if it makes sense for us to consider that. If we want to have one of the June meetings with the, as we described, with all of the boards, then that we could do June 13th would be the first occasion when that, when we'd be in that venue and we could all fit there. And by that point, we might know, we would have to know what would a moratorium look like, and what would be the length of time, and what would be the scope of it, and what would be the benefit to it. Meanwhile, I think we need to determine what are we trying to accomplish in that conversation beyond simply hearing each other's questions and learning from each other, because right now it's been a very long time since we've sat in the room with planning board and zoning board members. And
So-
I think they're also, some of the questions they have are reflective of their experience and of other folks in the community.
Yeah, I have to say, moratoriums, my preference is to move forward. Because moratoriums, again, my preference is to move forward. That is, so I think there are two things on the table, that whether we do a moratorium or whether we move forward. Because I expected more thorough comments. And that's not what I got. So I appreciate the questions, but I really was expecting something different. And I don't want to hold things up.
I don't know what you were expecting, because that was never actually discussed, and I don't think you submitted anything in writing to them to ask them anything specific that you wanted to hear about, so it's hard to say. I heard questions that I never thought I'd be getting, so I had no idea what my expectations were. It was more than I thought I was going to get, but it wasn't what I thought I was going to get. So it's, and it's really hard, Stuart, because you're sort of conveying for two boards, which is a whole bunch of citizens who live here have been involved in this longer than some of us have been involved in this conversation, and they deal with it directly. Some have more expertise, some have less, So, and I know nothing about moratoriums. I now will have to do homework on that. I don't know how we got in this conversation from yes or no on moratoriums. Wasn't even on the table 18 minutes ago, but I don't know anything about it. So I gotta and I'm not Googling it now while I'm sitting in a meeting, although I oftentimes do that. So I don't have a real strong opinion either way, except that I don't know what our expectations were of what they were going to come back with.
So I have quite a few comments. So first, and I think how you ended it was perfect to get me started, is maybe we weren't as clear. I mean, we kind of just out of nowhere made, hey, let's include these boards. We want general feedback, but maybe we didn't give them what they needed to give us specific feedback, or maybe now we just step back and say, why are we asking you for feedback? What do you want to know? Trustee Bazemore, whatever. I'm not speaking for all of you, but I'm just, and maybe that's why we got general responses, right? That you would kind of, the only difference is that these individuals are a little bit more experienced because they serve on these boards, but you would also get some of those comments you would also get at a town hall, at a general town hall. As far as the joint meetings, I believe that I was always told, and this is Stuart, please, if you can, that trustees weren't allowed to go to these meetings, so much so that the current chair of the ZBA felt uncomfortable when our village manager went to her meeting and sent me an email, and I spoke to Debbie about it. So maybe that should be addressed first, whether the village manager and the village board members should be going to meetings. If so, why? If not, why? And
You're simply sitting in the audience and observing the meeting. It's perfectly fine.
okay, so that answers that. So then that was just an unfounded rule that we've just had.
We had the experience you're going through, I think we all felt.
Yeah, we've
When was
all-
that, John? A few months ago, we all had that same look that you have on your face right now. Yes. We had
Yeah.
that look. Am I
Well, no,
right?
because I mean, there's.
We were, I was told that when I became a trustee, and then it changed.
I would like to distinguish what we're talking about with having a joint meeting is not.
Oh no, I was gonna get to that. Yeah, I just wanted to because
Sorta
it's all
cut him off,
tying.
But I just wanted to
No,
address that
thank you.
simple,
I appreciate
what
that.
you
Actually,
just said.
Trustee, I'm sorry. I actually, the record would reflect that I actually was not in favor of sending this to the
duly noted.
So I just wanted to, you're right, I didn't ask for anything because I
Right.
wasn't
I
interested.
mean, you still could have asked, even
Yeah.
if you didn't
Yeah.
agree with it, but I'm just saying, you know.
With that being said, it is good to know that we can go to these meetings now on the record for the first time I think ever, at least in the past couple years. Moving on, though, I believe that these three boards are separate entities for a reason. Their intention, their role, their intention and role necessarily isn't our role and vice versa, but we have to find a way to understand and kind of work together, unifying. Obviously, I definitely share that not everyone feels that we really get a chance to talk to each other. To formalize a meeting, that's fine with me. That is uniting a couple of groups. I would have to better understand the scope of it's an official meeting, what is being discussed. The facilitator part, I totally get why you would need a facilitator because now you have three entities, one governing board for the whole municipality. It sounds more of a bigger picture, whether it's a comprehensive plan, whether it's, I mean, their comments even went into economic development. It's really more of a town hall, universal conversation. And if that's the case, you would open it up to all your committees, all your commissions, all your boards, and get their feedback as well. I think it's a little premature to plan such a meeting in a month. Need more timing to really hash out what is the meeting, why we're only inviting them, why can they only discuss this policy when we're looking at so many policies. So yeah, that's about it. So I went into intention of us asking them what was the intention and whether we were specific or not when we first asked them for feedback. I went into this unknown rule that's not a rule about us not being allowed into meetings, and then I went into okay, cool, check. Sorry, I had to recap all that, but thank you.
Summarized it,
Yes.
but it's land uses and housing, so it's different from the other boards. It depends, I mean, I think you want to, right, it's a working session, so we're having a conversation, so I'm sort of hearing you also saying, like, you gotta decide on the framing. So the framing can be large, framing can be small, right? That's up to us.
Mhm.
You could do both. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You could have a June and a July and say, this is about land use and housing, and this is about something bigger. I mean, we can decide that. I don't think anything's mutually exclusive by having just the land use and the board, and then making larger is mutually exclusive necessarily. So I'm sort of hearing you, like, sort of recap, but I can also see that a need for framing is where you're going with this as well. Could be big, could be small, right?
Yeah, it could be either or. I mean, I was just commenting on the way that it was presented in detail for a date next month,
Okay.
since we're just talking about it now. June, July,
Actually,
yeah.
you said July and you said June, so I'm just gonna.
There
I
are-
was sort
so
of kept looking at my.
We reached out to the library about when their facility was available to us so that we could host meetings in that space. They were available, all 4 of our work sessions in the months of June and July. So we said, we'll take it and we'll figure out what we're going to discuss as the time approaches. We have a lot of topics where we want to be able to invite more people. We want to be able to maybe have a different forum. When we've been there in the past, we've had an agenda that focuses on one subject matter. We did one about green building guidelines. We did one that was all focused on downtown. So we have to decide our agendas, rather than having a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's better if we can focus on a particular topic or take advantage of that forum. If we were to do this kind of a group meeting, it's a lot of people. So we would need a big space, so it could work well in that space. That was why I was suggesting June or July meeting.
I'm thinking now that maybe it'd be a good opportunity to kind of, if you remember a couple months ago, I was talking about do people get how we operate and what we do, and we spoke about kind of the event that we're hosting at Star that we're kicking off. Maybe now's a good opportunity to have a public town hall on housing, and that could start off the conversation. What is the whole community saying, thinking, business community? Have all the stakeholders come at once to just have a time where we're not talking at them, or we're not telling them how to talk or when to talk, but we do have a framework that it is about housing, because that way you're including everyone at first. I do understand the logic of wanting to include particular boards in a particular order, but I always want to start with the public, then we can go to our boards maybe, or and then other boards that are touching or possibly of relevance to that, right? So the economic development part, right? That can tie into other areas. Most of our boards, commissions, and committees are affected by the decisions that they all make anyways, and that we make. So I think at first, not a formal work session, but really, when's the last time the village had an actual town hall on an issue, besides the circle last year, but like an actual town hall on housing as a whole? Since it seems to be our most, I don't want to just name it controversial, but it seems to be the most popular subject we have currently in the village.
Well, actually, the housing needs assessment last year included several different public forums for discussing housing in different locations, different stakeholders, different public discussions in different locations. So there was a lot of that.
That was for the study, though.
It was
Solely for the study.
On housing. It
on
wasn't-
housing.
Needs assessment, though. This is more like
If I hear what you're saying. It is absolutely an appropriate forum, and it's a good use for that space for some of our summer meetings to be focused on that. That's something different than what's being brought up right now. The first section of Kevin Dworka's, actually no, the first section is data. It's either section 2 or 3, really focuses on what his process was in reaching out to the community. And it was, there were a variety of attempts and a variety of approaches that were focused entirely on housing. And that's what resulted in the policy framework, but the outreach was pretty substantial. And what we're talking about now is, as we move forward with implementing some of the recommended policy framework, going back to the public. And that's what it sounds like I'm hearing you're suggesting, is going back to the public and saying, housing is something we're focused on. We've got these recommendations. This is how we're proposing that we may move forward.
no.
We want to hear from you now. Tell us your thoughts, your concerns.
I
That's
kind of
not
want
what you're saying?
No, I kind of want to step back more. So, the housing needs assessment did do a pretty big job and initiative of reaching out to different groups and stakeholders for the purposes of doing a report that they were hired to do. But I want to talk about, housing right now. People don't even understand the different types of housing, why we're even discussing it. Why do we need a 10%, a set aside? Why do we need a 20? How do we determine that? ETPA, where does that come into it? Why are we talking about ETPA? All density bonuses, how does that work? I don't want to narrow what the public can talk about And this is now, I am making a judgment call. Given us speaking about all of these, particularly the affordable housing ordinance, whatever we choose to raise it up to, whether we do so or not, and also ETPA has shown to me how much the public just wants to be more engaged or educated on it, the confusion around it, and I think we need to start at that part, at that stage again, without having a particular, without telling them that it's so, that it's only for ETPA or it's only for our ordinance. Why do our 10 businesses feel that this is gonna, why does that group feel that we're targeting this, or what are the issues around housing and Ossining in general? Have we done an effective job at providing an education as to why we're doing what we're doing, instead of just me or you or anyone being a reactive person because of an issue that we perceive to be an issue, or because of a report that we got, as we should. But I think that being less targeted, which I never do, in this case would really give and focus more on education and really hearing all the stakeholders about all the misconceptions around housing, and a platform to really clarify what you hear, what you think, what you thought. Because the past since I started, especially with this and ETPA, we could surely use a lot of that on both sides. So that's kind of why I was bringing it up.
So again, and Mayor Garrity, wonderful idea, but when we start to, this whole conversation has now expanded. I mean, I have to say that this board has definitely been committed to public engagement. I mean, we have done that, particularly with our housing needs assessment. Do I believe that there definitely needs to be an education on all different types of housing, particularly right now in our community? Definitely. Do I think that people need to understand what role housing plays with respects to economic development? Absolutely. But we do have a policy on the table. We have talked about this policy. This is going on the third year. Everything that you want to talk about with joint meetings can very well happen. In fact, we could start that conversation in July and work all the way to next year if we chose to. Me personally, when it comes to moratoriums, that is not my first option. That is just not my first option. Would I do a moratorium for the sake of discussing affordable housing policy? Absolutely. But I do think that we've talked about this policy. We've thought as a board, not only myself, but members at this table have articulated, understanding that when we were trying to flesh out this policy, that we were trying to create a policy that actually would create housing, at a greater need, right? That we were being mindful that we were actually creating an affordable housing policy that is more within line of, our area median, the average median income of our village. And I think that's something to be committed to, because we can, we as elected officials, we can have 10,000 questions until you can't have any more questions again. But there has to be a point where you act, right? And if you don't know, please understand that affordable housing is a major issue. And it's something that needs to be addressed. And it's not something that we have to debate. And if we want to do more information, we could very well decide, hey, we're going to pass this new policy. And you know what, the more we get in depth and the more we get in depth, this might be a new solution. But I do think we owe it to our community, right? That we provide housing that is affordable, that we don't stop the brakes on projects, that we that we draw a clear line in the sand. We've talked about this. We've had public engagement, and in fact, also once you do your public hearing, you can hear from more of the public. A lot of those comments I would have expected at a public hearing. Those are valid questions. I'm going to say it again. I want to move forward, and given the fact that we've also been talking about going, talking about our comprehensive plan. We're going to have a meeting in July, and June and July. We need to start vetting who's going to be doing our comprehensive plan. We need to throw it all on the table, the parking. We need to do it all, because then we're having these conversations. We bring in this facilitator, and meanwhile, it's 2 years from now, and there's also another part of the community that just wants Ossining to do something, that they're waiting. I mean, that was one of the hugest things about the DWRC. The community reacted to a roundabout, right? And part of that was, when are we going to do something? When are we going to do something? So I'm not of the opinion to wait. I'll open up to my other colleagues of whether we really want to draw this out, or if we want to move forward, then have more conversations and more conversations until we come to a solution.
So the proposal that's on the table is actually, that's, as it's written, does not reflect some of the comments at our last meeting. It was the last written version that we had before it went to the land use boards. I think it was still only, does it?
This version, which is revision 3, is the version that went to the land use boards. There are some changes here that have to be made. There's one or two things that are included in here which actually have to come out because it's inapplicable to affordable housing. Specifically, there was a section that the village board could essentially waive all bulk area and zoning requirements. That actually only applies in cluster developments. So the section that's referenced here, 7738 of the village law, only deals with cluster developments. So putting that in here would basically go beyond what the village law permits. So you can't waive that.
Wait, putting it in there would...
If you put that in here as just a general, we don't have cluster developments here.
Okay.
So,
But I thought you pulled that out of the Tarrytown. I thought that's where that portion came.
but Tarrytown may have cluster developments that allows it.
Okay, okay. My assumption was that you were just kind of pulling different pieces from
Yeah,
different
but that one relates to that, so that's something that would have to come out. I want to tighten up one or two of the definitions, and although it may sound odd, this is subject to secret because it is an environmental impact. It will likely be a type 2 action where nothing has to be done, and it will require the completion of a short form EAF.
How was that determined?
Because action is very broadly defined, and there are cases that say that impacts upon affordable housing are considered to be can be considered environmental impacts for purposes of secret.
And is that something that was done back in 2008?
I have no idea.
Just back to Mayor Garrity's point. So besides those 2 points that you just highlighted to revise and change and some tweaks, is that third revised copy the latest to reflect what we did last time?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Because that's what was presented to the two boards.
And so I spoke to you earlier about the whole density conversation.
Yes.
And so how did that pan out? Because what you had presented at our March 10th or 11th meeting wasn't exactly as accurate as we had discussed. We discussed things verbally that weren't actually.
Well,
in-
I just want you to know, this was produced before the March 11th meeting.
Okay.
So there wasn't a revision after the March 11th meeting because it was then going to the boards to discuss. So I wanted to get their comments before any further changes, were made.
Let me be a little more clear. We had a whole conversation about bonus density.
Yes, and we did, and I want to be very clear. 2 things. A lot of the terms were conflated during the discussion, if you watch the tape, between density, bonus density, additional density. Again, to be very clear, and we'll start with, if it's 100 units, and you have to do a 20% set aside. If you do a 20% set aside, you will get, the way this was originally written and the way that our statute is now, you get 10%. You had indicated you wanted that to be increased to 20%.
I had indicated that I was asking for 15%. Then we had a whole conversation that it was actually moving to 20%. And then at the end of the meeting, I was like, "Oh, Stuart, is it 20%?" And he was like, "Yeah." Well, I said, "Well, it's not actually reflected in the actual document." So what is the bonus density as reflected?
I just need to make one comment.
Okay.
Because I have watched the tape now 5 or 6 times. It's not entirely accurate, okay? Because I don't want to get into that, but
Okay.
I just want to explain how it is. Here's how the density will work. If this is what the board wants, it's real simple. If you have 100 units, it's 20% set aside, so that would be 20, so 80 units are market rate. That individual or that developer would then get, by just doing that, he'd get 20% additional units. Because the way it's written here is he gets to add to his market rate the number of units he has as affordable. So it would equal out.
Okay.
He then gets an additional 5% if he has units that are, if 50% or more of the affordable units are for very low income. So that would be 5% of additional market rate. He could also get an additional 5% if he does ADA compliant. And that's only from the affordable housing. It deals nothing with the other units, with the other zones where there's additional density, which deals on totally different topics, but solely on affordable. So that's how that would work. That would then require a revision to one of the definitions in here, where it says 10%.
Okay.
But basically what it would be is your affordable, it will equal the amount of your affordable, effectively.
So the language that's in there now
Right.
that references waiving of existing zoning regulations, that needs to be taken
That needs
out
to be taken out.
because of the way it's written.
Because the section that's referenced there, 7738 of the village law, is inapplicable to this particular section of the code.
Because that is actually the question that I raised that I wanted to hear from the land use boards, and that's what I regret not articulating to them. Because if we move forward with this as it's written, where a building gets a 20% bonus density for simply complying with our affordable housing ordinance, in some districts, not all, there are height restrictions.
That is correct. In most districts there are, that's right.
Well, so I guess that's the question. The concern that I wanted them to address, and that they still have not considered, is their reaction, or how they would deal with it, or their advice, based on their experience, of if we put forward a new affordable housing policy that inherently requires a developer to violate existing zoning codes based on our current comprehensive plan. So either they violate it or they get
So they would have to apply for a variance.
so we're requiring them to apply for a variance in order to comply with our affordable housing policy. That was the question that I had for them, and they didn't consider it. Because,
Well, they only considered it in the sense that it may well result in additional applications that would come before them. But to the extent that if someone is applying for an area variance, they would treat it like any other area variance that comes before them. Remember, from a site plan perspective, that's planning board. So planning board is going to deal with all of that in terms of ultimately number of affordables, and all that will be written in. If they need a variance, they would get it from the zoning board. So it's the zoning board that would ultimately decide, can they make the building as high as they want to make it? Can they basically remove their setbacks? Can they do, that's the kind of stuff. And there's a 5-pronged test to determine, area variances.
so is it possible, I think it is, but you're our attorney, so is it possible to have, to incentivize affordable housing development differently in different zones?
The answer to that is yes. And in fact, one of the suggestions made by one of the planning board members, and I apologize, I didn't read all my notes, was to get to the 20% set aside, is there a way to incentivize your developer? In other words, let's say you start at a base of 10, but if they do certain things, they can get themselves up to, you know, they can get perhaps up to a 20% set aside, maybe 20% additional units. That was one of the suggestions, is maybe there's a way that you just don't automatically go 20%, but you sort of work your way to get up there. But the answer is yes, you could do it. For example, I believe it's Bedford has a 20% set aside in one particular zone, and they have different percentages for set asides in other zones. So you could go by the particular zone that you're in.
I just want to comment, when you say inherently, and it's just a language, Mayor Garrity, inherently violate our comprehensive plan, I particularly don't understand what that means, because our comprehensive plan was a list of strategies, right? Like when I look at, you know, section 3 of our downtown, right? I don't see any, you know, any outright, you know, that these buildings should be at this height. Now, if you're referring to our zoning, right? Okay, but however, I do want to say, because like when you use these strong words, that is, you brought up an example like, you know, 147 Main Street, that we can do it a lot. My understanding from the planning board members that I've spoke to, and also the people who are actually familiar with that particular lot, years ago, Ginsburg wanted to build on that lot, but he actually said, hey, you know, for me to actually make the performer, I need 6 stories, because the lot itself was so small. I mean, that is a weird lot. So I just want to say, for clarification, you know, when we start talking about height restrictions and, you know, and setbacks and things that the planning board does, this is largely depending on the lot size. And that is why we have planning and zoning boards, and that's why they make certain determinants, and that's why they may waive parking, because when you're trying to get a project that fits, you know, they have the latitude to change those things. So the idea that the affordable housing law will inherently or violate something, I'm in favor of having someone come in and talk about those things, because I do think that we all come from different places about how much we know about planning and zoning, but it really is depending on the lot. So I just want to just make that clarification. So I did have
The clarification that you're making is, it would have been more accurate for me to say that would inherently violate our existing zoning codes, which are born out of the comprehensive plan and need to be consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, so it might have been like, again, I mean, I wouldn't personally use the word violate, because it goes by each site. Like, you know, I'm just saying, your example that you used last time of 147, oh, it should have been a 3 or 4 story building. The truth is that if someone had to probably do that project at a 3-story building, it just wouldn't have been economically feasible because of the lot size. So I'm saying,
I believe it's actually like 48 feet. It
Right.
has to do with height of the building
Right.
rather than stories. It's
and I-
typically
and I- and I-
for,
It's either, it's, let's say, and for some, it's 2.5 stories, 35 feet.
and
So-
I think that's kind of what Lynn was trying to explain last time.
It's on a case-by-case basis.
It's
you're
that
saying,
it's a case-by-case basis. But I do want to know, because again, is there any consensus of the board of actually moving forward with the recommended changes now that we've actually understand what this proposed law is?
So, hey, Stuart, what's the secret process? So we just
It would
start
need-
it.
Well, it could actually be done at the time you have your, not even really your public hearing, it's really when you would adopt the, if you adopt the ordinance, because it would be, most likely, it's what's called a type 2 action, and a type 2 action is exempt from any further, you know, environmental impact statement review. But because it's let me put it this way, generally, code changes, unless they have no environmental impact, are supposed to, you know, have some sort of secret component to it. So here it would just be what's called a short form EAF, which is just a couple of pages, and it pretty much is a form that fills itself, and just gets, you know, filed up with Albany, and that's pretty much it. But at least that way, it's all T's are crossed and I's are dotted. It's not like an EIS process or anything like that.
So,
Yeah, so, you know, I think we need to, you know, plant our flag here. I really, you know, I'm in favor of this. Obviously, there's some things that need to be taken out based on Stuart's comments, and I'd like to see a, you know, fully revised copy of what we're looking at, and, you know, I'd like to begin the legislative process. You know, I think we need to make a statement about, or at least I feel we need, as a village government, to make a statement about what's important to us with respect to affordable rental housing in relationship to new construction. Now, we may pass this, and we may go through a comprehensive plan process, and we may decide that, yeah, that doesn't work, or maybe there's other things that we need to do. We might even change it. But, you know, this is part of a recommendation that came as a result of Kevin Dorca's study. You know, you know, it's, the percentages are a little bit higher than some of the other municipalities that have similar programs. So I don't feel like we're stretching too far. You know, I understand the comments of the land use boards and the zoning board and everything else. I wish we had been a little more focused in terms of our ask. I think, you know, we kind of threw it in their laps, and this is what we got back. And I think we got back more questions than answers, and rightfully so. I mean, they have to sit in judgment of land use law and any exceptions to that. So, so that's where I'm at.
So I'm looking at our calendar. The May 9th meeting, I believe Debbie's out of town.
I'm here.
someone has to be here. We have a meeting, right? I mean,
If you like the Tonight Show, we'll all.
okay.
Well, I mean, we do have some things on the agenda that Debbie doesn't need to be here for that we're looking forward to. But, Stuart, there's some updates to be made to the affordable housing plan based on some of the conversations
Yes.
tonight, without question, and things that you knew in advance. So if you could circulate an updated version. Meanwhile, I'd also like to get more of an understanding of what a short-term moratorium, what would be the benefits, what would be the parameters of that, what would that make sense in conjunction with what we're doing? And we've been talking for a long time about having joint board meetings with some of the land use boards, so I'm interested in having that be one of the 4 meetings in either June or July. So let's start looking at how we might focus that conversation, depending on where we are in the affordable housing policy at that point, might influence how we want to structure that conversation.
Mayor, what I'd also do is, I know that when the ordinance was originally passed, there were a set of policies and procedures that were put into place that are actually in writing. Those should be updated to match what the new ordinance will be. So I'll circulate both revision to local law 3 with what we talked about tonight, with a revision to the policies and procedures.
Could we also, at the May 23rd meeting, could we get an update about what is going on, what's in the pipeline right now, where it is with the land use board, so we understand
Yeah,
what's
and
going on?
anytime you want to have that, I'm happy to give that
Oh,
to you,
it
sure.
makes sense to be
As far
part
as
of it.
projects,
Yeah, what
Okay.
projects are in the pipeline right
Sure.
now, and what have put
Okay.
in their applications, so we know,
Sure.
you know, and then advice on how they may be impacted, and what's the best practice for going
Sure.
so just so I'm clear. So we had the majority of the board to move forward with the next steps of finalizing draft 3 with new comments tonight. Doing the guidelines that you just said,
Yes, thank you.
starting secret process, and that's about it. As far as what is relevant to this particular item, right? Am I missing anything?
If we want to consider a moratorium, we need to have a better understanding
That-
of what that would look like.
That's separate, though. Because
No, it's actually related to this.
well, no, because what the item at hand is draft 3. A moratorium would be understanding what it is, getting educated, doing a whole meeting about it, getting people, you know.
But they need to happen in concert, because if we're going to implement an affordable housing program, we need to have an understanding of, I don't understand enough about moratoriums on when we need to do that. So maybe we could get that sooner, please?
All right, so,
I can have that for you, you know.
so we're starting a public hearing on this on May 9th?
On draft 3, you mean, right?
Okay. Are we,
No, we're having a public conversation on the 23rd because Debbie will not be here on May 9th.
wait, a public conversation? What are we gonna be talking about?
Bringing it back to the work session.
How long does this take? Like, at what point do we actually call for a public hearing? Because I thought that's when we were talking about just planting our flag.
That's why I was asking about secra and the
Yeah,
guidelines
I
and
thought-
what's,
I thought
yeah.
that we were gonna do a public hearing and secret hand in hand. Like, the moratorium is one issue, but I do wanna separate the two. So, at what point do we bring this to a public hearing? At what point do we present something to the public to actually have them to respond to something, and that we actually bring
We
it
don't
to-
have a final version for us to respond to yet.
Okay, so I mean, that can be done soon, and then once we get that, when do we call for a public hearing? That's my question. Because I don't wanna be, this is,
So we get the revised copy on Wednesday, right, we'll say, right? I mean, on Wednesday. Okay, so we get it. We cross our T's about what was added as per our discussion today. And then next, you start secret application, or
Secret started really, as I said,
it's new to me, so that's why I want to make sure that,
EAF is just it's a simple form to fill out, because it's not gonna require, a lead agency designation, it's not gonna be a complicated situation.
so after we get the revised final copy next week, what are the next steps procedurally?
Well, you would ultimately, you'd have a resolution to call for a public hearing.
Mike,
I
your mic.
apologize. Sorry. Have to call for a resolution to hold a public hearing. Then you'd have your public hearing. And then, if you did it in 2-week sequences, and then ultimately you would have a vote on your legislation.
All right, so what I would request, because of course, as we talked earlier, and I've reiterated, I do not want to receive anything on Wednesday when it comes to legislation. So if there's some way, because it seems like there's minor tweaks, if we could get it at least by Monday,
Friday.
or Friday, preferably Friday, and then if we could.
I promise you I will try my very best.
All right,
If you've looked at my desk lately, you might see there's other, but I will get it, because it's not that much, so I will get it to you.
Okay,
All right, so, but my thing is that if if it's done by next Wednesday, can a resolution, like, how much more questions do we have to have? We can clearly go into a work session next Wednesday if need be, and then I'm asking that a resolution actually be prepared to call for the public hearing on the 2nd at our next legislative session. That's where I'm trying to.
well, then the public hearing would be 2 weeks later.
Well, the question is what this board would want to do. Do you want to, if you wanted to look at this, for example, during continuing business next week, would you want a resolution next week to call for the public hearing, which would be 2 weeks after? Or do you want to put the resolution on for the public hearing? Next week would be what, May the 2nd?
Second.
So, okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm not, that was not, tone was not
no, I
indicative
understand,
of you,
I
my
understand.
feelings toward you, sir.
So if you did it May the 2nd, you could, if you did the resolution, then you would have your public hearing on the 23rd.
No, the
then you would-
23rd is the fourth Wednesday, it would be the 16th.
Oh, okay, I'm just completely.
And no, the work session on the 23rd is the next time when everybody at these tables plus Debbie will be here. I think it would behoove us to have a conversation in a work session environment with Debbie, but we could have called for the public hearing by that point.
you can set the public hearing any legislative session or any time you
So the
want.
public
I mean,
hearing could take place on June 6th, which would give us an opportunity to
Yes.
have a public meeting and hear back from each other, ask more questions, let the public weigh in, preempt, whatever. I don't understand why we're trying to push this 2 weeks sooner and not allow ourselves to have another work session conversation with the manager present.
Okay, so if you can give me a reason, like, I mean, we're having a conversation right now. What I'm saying is that we can have as many conversations as we want to have. We can call a public hearing and then go into a work session after because public hearings, we actually may say, oh, the public said this, and maybe we'll want to consider it. But again, I don't want to lag this. I don't want to draw this out because we've already had multiple conversations of leading all the way into July. So again, and we can call a work session at any time. Like, I don't know particularly what our village manager.
Well, we can always have conversations during continuing business, obviously. So what you're suggesting, what you'd like to do is you would like, if Stuart is able to provide us in the next 48 hours, ideally, with a updated proposed legislation, then we would have this weekend to review it, and we would call for a public hearing next week, and the public hearing might be on May 16th, and we would hear from the public, and then we could consider comments by the public at our meeting on the 23rd.
Absolutely.
And then we could,
Village manager is there, right?
yes,
Yeah.
correct. She would be there on the 23rd, so we would be able to have a conversation following the public hearing.
Well, we could also, I mean, she's not here tonight. I'm sure she'll watch this. Hi, Debbie, when you watch this. Hi, hope you feel better. I think that during continuing business, we could also go into more detail next week as well. Kind of hear from her, and that way, it's still fresh. She could see what we discussed. I'm sure you'll speak to her. I'll speak to her, and that way, she's part of our discussion even by next Wednesday.
Stuart, is that a reasonable timeline for you, since you're the one who's doing all the preparation for our meetings?
I just have to say that I don't get all my stuff done because all we're doing is shoving this down. And I'm beginning to be very resentful of work that I need done, that keeps getting pushed around because we're now down to one issue at every single meeting and taking staff time for one issue. I'd like to get some of the work. I don't have a staff except you guys, and I want to get some of my work done. So when you answer that question, let's be very clear that we are not a single issue board. There are 11 or so initiatives. I sit on boards that I need work done for, that are based on citizen requests as well. So, I'm not quite sure what, 1 week makes such a big difference. Seriously. And I'm not sure I'm going to be here on June 9th, but, it is what it is, so. I'd like to be there. I mean, I'd like, this is staff time being used over and over again. I have the landlord-tenant committee meeting stuff that some stuff wasn't getting done for. No complaints here, but, we're running something for a week. So to your point, if we've been looking at it for 2 years, what are we doing here? It's like a 1 or 2 week difference. What is going to happen here? And why shouldn't others and boards be involved in this conversation? I'm not even sure about what we're doing here. So can you please give us a legitimate time where I'm not going to be told that my work doesn't get done because of this? I mean, it's Wednesday night. Tomorrow's Thursday. How are you going to get done Friday?
Not while I'm taking my CLE course, then. But I two things. One, and I did mention this at the last meeting, the acting commissioner of planning, Norma Drummond, who was helpful in giving me some information on the draft, offered to review the ordinance. I don't think that's a bad idea because basically the county lives this basically every single day, and particularly Ms. Drummond. So I'd like the ability to at least get input from someone who really lives this a lot. In terms of my ability to get it out, to the extent of being able to get this back to you folks, I do my best, but let me say this much. Can I get it to you? I can have something for you, definitely, Monday. Does it take my time? It does. I mean, listen, you know, I work on numerous topics every single day, but we can get to this, and I will get to this. But I would like to have Ms. Drummond's comments, and the reason I say that is she may have a comment which would indicate that there may be an issue with regard to something that we have in this proposed legislation. We don't have to take that as gospel, but I think it's fair to get a comment from someone who basically does this. I'd like the ability to do that, and then go from there. I don't see a problem at this point. If you want to put a resolution before the board on May the 2nd to conduct the public hearing on the 16th, you know, you can do that. You can always put your public hearing off if you had to.
Well, but we're talking about conducting a public hearing for something that we don't have a final version of, because you're still doing your due diligence to get
which is
feedback
what-
from Norma
what-
Drummond and
so
share with us a
what I'm s-
draft.
And so, my druthers would be to give me a little bit more time to make sure I have all the ducks in a row. But I also, you know, report to you folks. So if you want something done, I will get it to you. Simple as that.
I think it's reasonable for us to give you the time to get the feedback you would like, to do your due diligence and making sure you're presenting us with something that's going to hold up. I think it's also valid to try and give the public who would like to speak at the public hearing an opportunity to also have time to read the document that we're proposing. So I'd like to have it something that we can share with folks in advance, well in advance of the public hearing. So then let us plan on the May 16th being when we call for the public hearing, which would take place June 6th.
That works from my perspective.
So that you call for the public hearing on the 16th, and that would take place on the 6th of June.
Correct, John.
Yeah, trustee, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify for the public that's watching. So even before I became a member of this board in January, I came into a board that predetermined, and I agreed with them, that housing was like one of the top priorities this year, like top 2 really, because it affects our safety, our quality of life. Lives literally depend on it right now, which is why we're talking about all these different types of housing items. So yeah, it is a priority. I totally agree. As far as for people to really know who we're watching, how this works, if a trustee wants an item on an agenda or wants to discuss something, they have the right to submit it in whatever fashion they feel is appropriate for themselves to Mary Garrity, which is in charge of arranging what has to be done and doing the procurement for it to be on the agenda. And that's how our process works. There's no one, no one on this board is slapping anyone's wrist that we can't put or discuss any item. It's been a pretty equitable process that we've had here. And I just want the public to know that that's the process. It's pretty open, it's pretty clear. And if any of my colleagues here tonight have items that have not been brought up, I encourage you to follow the process and request it. And hopefully we could have a process have the next step of adding that to an agenda. I'm assuming a work session if it has to be discussed, and then starting whatever has to be done as far as our next steps. Thank you.
So, is it May 2nd or May 16th? Because you said that. I don't know if there's consensus to May 2nd or May 16th. For the resolution to be prepared, and Stuart wants to get comments. I mean, I think it's something that can be done. I mean, a public hearing is that we can extend the public hearing. We can do all of that. Her comments can come later. I remember some of the comments that she had at just the initial conversation of actually looking at our affordable housing law. I think it's something that I think it's something that we can do, and we can get those comments when we come back and talk on May 23rd. I don't see any reason that a public hearing can't be called on May 16th. We go into a work session because by those time, Ms. Drummond can give whatever necessary comments that she may have. We can extend a public hearing. So there are two things on the board, two issues on the table, May 16th or May 2nd. So I just wanted to make sure that we have, majority rules. I just wanted to see where we were going.
So Stuart asked for us to give a little more time for him to be prepared. So I'm respectful of that. But John, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with the 16th. I mean, I think that's, if he wants more time to get it right, then I'd rather have him get it right. So I see no reason to rush something, because there's just more opportunity for there to be a mistake. If we're gonna pass this thing, I want Stuart to be comfortable that it's defensible and that he's gotten proper counsel from other experts, that whatever legislation we're passing is solid. So that's where I'm at.
All right.
And once we advise county that we have a deadline, they should be able to give you what you need beforehand.
She responds very quickly.
Yeah, so.
Okay, we have gone into the 2-hour mark. I think we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back. And I think we may need to skip past the next item, because Debbie was going to lead that discussion, or you guys have some?
I have the
Okay,
sh-
all right, all right.
Go ahead.
This was distributed to the board a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
So it's the same information the board has.
All right, so let's take a quick, Hey, sir, we are back in business.
Thank you. The next topic is naming opportunities for public space. And a couple of weeks back, village manager had forwarded to everybody a spreadsheet with how various other municipalities deal with their naming issues, as well as what I believe from looking at this were the recommendations from the Parks and Recreation Commission. And the way Debbie had broken this up was street namings versus namings of buildings, facilities, and parks, and basically, what the differences are. I don't think we were talking about streets as much as we were about places within parks, if I recall correctly. So I'll emphasize on that then. I think the Parks and Rec Commission, if I'm reading this correctly, the individual for whom the particular location or space would be named has to be a resident of Ossining, or at least a resident for, I guess, 5 years, looks like what she's got here. And that the process for authorization as proposed by the Parks and Rec Board would be an application to the Park Superintendent, reviewed by the advisory board, and then forwarded to the Board of Trustees. Under historical contributions, essentially, the person would have significant participation. What Debbie had written here is coach in ref youth programs, again, for more than 5 years. There's also something here about significant financial contributions, but I'm not sure. It says yes here, but I don't know what that is. But a few things that are important. The cost is borne by the nominee. The staff would do the installation, and so that would be important. It would not be a cost that would be borne by the village. And that's the recommendations from Parks and Recreation. The two municipalities that have naming procedures within Westchester County, one is New Rochelle. They do permit their honorary naming. The person must have been deceased for more than a year, must be a resident for more than 10 years, and there it's to the city manager with then village board approval. There would have to be some historical significance of the individual with some contribution, a history of residence in the village. New Rochelle does permit corporate naming, and that would be in New Rochelle. And Ardsley, again, it would be approved there by the village manager, and then to go to the rec board, and then to Board of Trustees. And also, historical significance of the person is important, and that person should have some historical contribution. And one thing it looks like it says here for Ardsley, is that architecture review and public hearing, they, I think, discourage certain types of renaming in Ardsley. So those are the only two that have it specifically as to parks. The others have to do with streets, but I won't go into that. But If this board wanted to, institute a program like that, again, I think the best as it was is the application to the park superintendent with the rec board giving its opinion, and then ultimately it comes to the board of trustees, with the costs have to be borne by the nominee for putting that in. And again, obviously, where that would have to be located wouldn't be the name. You wouldn't be renaming a park, but it might be something within a park, might be a bench or a tree or something like that. So that's what we have there. We don't have anything specific in our code as to this at this point, but this is something that can be there and can certainly, then the rec board can prepare their own, procedures as to what they want to do in terms of naming of these particular spots. So it's a summary of Debbie's sheet.
And we're being asked today to do what?
My recollection was that from just looking at the past emails is that I think Debbie was being asked to just provide an explanation of what the naming opportunities were in different locations and compare it to what the rec board has done. It would probably be best if it was formalized in some way, because I don't think there is a specific policy or procedure at this point. But other than that, I think other than discussion, there's nothing. I certainly have not drafted anything at this point in terms of an ordinance. But this is, the procedures that are here, and I think she was looking more for just some sort of, discussion, because there have been requests recently for certain areas to be named, and that then led to this discussion and Debbie's preparation of this document, providing the different naming procedures in Westchester, and it also looks like up in Dutchess and in Nassau County.
So does this have to be legislated? Isn't this a policy? Necessary to legislate something?
No, you may well be right, Trustee Codman. I think that what you, the Recreation Advisory Board with the superintendent can promulgate certain procedures that they want to follow. They can make a recommendation to this board, and then if
We have the ultimate say anyway, right?
right. So ultimately,
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't. We don't have to pass a code. This isn't a law. This is a policy.
okay.
But
All right.
the question. But the thing is, it doesn't come up consistently, and depending on who's in office, an appointed office, a department head, a different. There's not any consistency.
No, there
The
should
point
be a-
is to institutionalize a
Yeah,
process.
standardize the process.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's because I'm kind of hearing two things. There's renaming an actual park, but if an applicant wants to name a tree or do a planting or set a memorial stone or take care of one area of the park, like is this an inclusive kind of policy, or is this purely for the sake of actually just renaming a park? So if I wanted to, Nelson Park, there's a bench I like. There's been a bench that's been there since I was 5 years old, and it's probably the same bench.
Same bench.
FYI, since I was 5 years old. But I wanted to dedicate a bench and put it in different parks. Does the person have to be a coach or have to have some kind of connections to the park? Or can we use this as an opportunity that if people actually want to memorialize loved ones or community members, where we're saying, okay, this is you can do a bench, or are we saying, hey, you know what? In order to actually rename a park, you either have to donate significant amount of money, or you have to have some kind of connection with Park and Recreation and working with youth.
So the Parks and Rec Board was, and they wrote this to us, they get requests, like they get no requests for a while and then somehow they get a bunch. I think John was, right, you were the liaison, and I think that's consistent from what I heard from folks that have been on that board for more than a decade. They want direction, they're uncomfortable, but I will tell you what they don't want. They were adamantly opposed to renaming a park. They were very clear as a group, and it was a full house, so it was a group that was there, 100% attendance, and they put in writing, it's in their minutes, they do not want to rename parks. They feel very strongly about that. There was lots of conversation about money. So corporations are sort of different, because corporations do it, it's advertising, really. And there was one person who talked about perpetuity. So it used to be, and you could see that in Lincoln Center, it used to be that you put your name on it. I mean, like for $100 million, but you put your name on it, and it was there forever. But that's not the case anymore, not at universities, not anywhere. So while an individual can get a rose garden, or to your point, a bench, and that might be, so they also want direction on that, whether things are into perpetuity. It is very rare that somebody sees a bench, actually, and I'm looking at you because I know you sat on that board, and says, I want that bench, and can I have that? What most often happens is they want a bench at a certain park because the person was a coach at this specific, and he was there. So there's a cost, the bench, the maintenance of the bench, the tree that falls on the bench, the ants that eat up the branch. So when you think it's a couple $100, you know, what they say is, you know, it really isn't. Somebody has to take care of it. Because as soon as you put somebody's name on it, it's no longer just a bench. Now it needs to be taken care of. So I'm giving you the levels of the conversation and keeping it short. So what I thought would be a like 2-minute conversation when I walked in that day, knowing it was on the agenda, because they're actually like, they understand the importance, and it really is rarely I like that bench. I know you're being, like, you gave me an example. I understand that. But it's oftentimes like, you know, this woman was a teacher, and then there was discussion, well, you know, do we do this for all teachers now? Everybody has a teacher they like. So I think we're talking parameters. I think it is policy. I think I will take them seriously at how they all opposed, without exception, renaming parks here. But, and not so crazy about renaming a field while I'm at it. I have no stake in this. I have no desire to name anybody I know, so I'm just passing this on as a liaison, but I think it's a consistent message. And that there's no inventory of what we currently have is the other issue. So like, we don't know where things are and what's available. So what happens is people walk around, they see a triangle, and they go, oh, you know, my favorite teacher who was here for 30 years, and they'll get 100 people who say that was their favorite teacher. So that wasn't the issue. The issue is like, so how do you decide? And like, you know, that it's this piece of whatever. I believe that the conversation is very much about, please give us direction. I don't think they want the board to make the decision. That wasn't what they discussed. I think they're very happy if we set a direction and the framework, that they would sit there and go, okay, you gave us the framework, we can do this. And they also actually, and I don't think the other villages and towns, municipalities do this, they actually suggest that they look at them, review them as they do with other things about twice a year. They don't want them coming in. I mean, they can come in, but they want to set 2 dates, so everybody in the community knows if that's what you want to do, here are the dates, and it's organized, da, da, da. I'm sharing with you, not my opinions, because I don't have one on this. I'm sharing with you the thought. The corporation one started being like, wait a second. Now we're talking like a money, like, how do you charge for it? Should we be the one? Should the board of trustees make that? So that's where it sort of went like, you know, into a different place. Now somebody has to decide how much. The maintenance of all these things, the inventorying of all this stuff, and then there's a discussion of what even qualifies as a park, because apparently we have some things that are called parks that are like the size of this room. Well, no, not sitting. We actually went to look. We take a ride, and I was like, I didn't know that was a park. I thought it was somebody's property, actually. So, but all of that is like the 20%. The 80% was give us parameters. We'd be happy to do this. I don't think we need the board. This is them saying it. Don't think the board needs to vote every time you want to do something. And they were very adamant that it has to be somebody who's lived here. I mean, that's why they came up also with how many years they have to be involved, that they have to have a direct link to that. If it's a park or a link, you know, there are a lot of nice people who do lots of great stuff, who are prominent in doing, you know, Helen Keller Society, which is a wonderful organization. But what do they do here? So those were like the conversations. Now, I will tell you, having sat through this, that this conversation can go on for a very long time. So my suggestion to all of us is to think of the size of the suitcase and just give directional of what we want to do. Because honestly, and it's not a heated conversation. It's not really, it wasn't. It's really, what's the size here so that we know what to do. The money thing is a deal. There are people with more money and people with less money. And I don't want to mention names because I don't know. I guess they're public meetings, but A very good point was made that I had not considered. So, corporations, we all get. It's a business for you. We'll give you a price. That's easy. It's how do you charge for this stuff? And is there an equitable way to do this so that a group with less money can have as much access as a group with more money, but without doing it for free, because that's not fair to anybody. So those are the weighted conversations about this.
Thinking about the particular petition that was brought before us, because we had named a street, and then we said, oh, we don't want to really name a street anymore. We want to have an actual process, and talking about parks. I do think there's something, and I definitely understand the pricing thing, but I do think there's something that if you have community members who, when you, whatever you want to name, whether it's a bench or a flower or a portion of a garden, or if you want to get elaborate and put a small little statue or whatever you may want to do. I mean, now we're talking about significant money or something, or a plaque, right?
Plaques.
Plaques, right? Like plaques. Like, I think, like, a couple of things like that whoever that petitioner is, they can go into the community, right? And they can get a petition, and they can, if it's something as small as $10, like, hey, we really want to honor this particular person, like, we want some type of memorialization of this particular person. I think we could offer that, right? I think that's a way to, like, kind of, it may be even a way to engage different community members into our parks, right? This may be a way where people can actually say, hey, you know what? There's a spot over here that is, in commemoration of such and such a person. If the rec advisory board wants to lead that and research that, they're more than welcome to. If our new superintendent wants to look at this as a way to engage community members and possibly like a revenue stream to do some other programming, that can be done. I'm in favor of all of that. I just think that this takes more conversation, whether or not we actually want to be the ones to, do the pen and paper work. I am.
Well, somebody has to.
Somebody has
Yeah.
to. But I do think, like, we should come up with some type of policy, or not even a policy, but some type of mechanism where people can memorialize or honor people. They don't have to be dead. You can do it while people are living.
As we know.
Yes.
If you recall, based on the last petitioner, they're very specific. They want a very specific place, and they want number of boards and number of people and the names. So I know you say that, but actually we haven't had hundreds of requests. Let's not exaggerate the whole thing, but the requests that are made, interestingly, are really specific and bigger than you would think. So I do think they need parameters that we all have to agree to. We could look at what's been done. Do any of those speak to anybody?
I mean, what was New Rochelle again? But then that was for a particular, actually renaming a park, right?
Well, facilities and parks, so it could be more than that. By the way, just one thing, I would suggest,
Work.
I'll tell you what facilities is. So a big thing which doesn't exist that much anymore, water fountains. Like city parks have fountains. People like to name those, and the water, people name those. Yeah, I know, but that's a big one.
It could also be a wall of the wreck too. Like, that's what I think, and I'll just give my
The community center actually didn't come up as something people requested.
and there's a lot of stuff in there.
But the community center could be a great option to
Aquatics
raise money.
facility and all that.
All the people that use it.
It sounds like the Parks and Rec Advisory Board have already done tremendous work on this already, and gave me more knowledge about it than I even thought there was when it comes to naming parks. I'm going to say this in the most sensitive way that I can. Parameters are needed as to where in a park, what in a park, because, you don't want to be going around Nelson Park with the memorial every three, whatever, or every corner, unless you do want to encourage that because of what the park is and what the stories are. But I think that the parameters do matter, and if they're comfortable, and you let us know,
I'll bring it up at the next
yeah,
meeting.
if they're comfortable with with drafting what those parameters would be, and
So I just want to be mindful. I'm sorry, Mayor. There is a like whatever we do, I would like this board, us collectively, to make a response to an applicant who has asked.
He's been responded to in writing.
Okay. Okay.
We've spoken again since then.
And spoken to.
Okay.
And he's attended rec advisory board meetings, he's attended meetings in
Okay.
my office, he's spoken to Debbie. It took a while, but we have had conversations. He's not satisfied yet, but we are
Okay.
having conversations, so
Yeah,
just
yeah,
want you
there's
to know
a
he's not been
difference.
ignored.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no, and he came to
Okay.
the rec,
Yeah.
Okay.
and people were there, and there was a conversation, and honestly, the best thing that came out of it is this discussion that, like, others want stuff. Whether someone likes the answers they get is a different question and answer, but spoken to, yes.
Okay. So
With, not to.
um,
Spoken to or spoken with.
what does North Shore have again?
New Rochelle has, the person, in New Rochelle, the person who it's being named after must be deceased for at least 12 months.
You gotta be dead.
Gotta be dead in New Rochelle. Gotta be dead in New Rochelle.
That's crazy.
They must have been a resident for at least 10
by
years.
parameters, I
The rec board
Requires-
did give us in writing. Didn't they give us something in writing, the rec board, that they
I
said
think
no
they did,
parks?
but I just have, what
Okay,
you-
ours actually did, they did do this,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Person has to have some historical contribution to New Rochelle. They do permit corporate naming in New Rochelle.
No, I heard that, yeah, that I got.
I would say one thing, I do think it's important that even if there's a recommendation by the RAB, that this board just approves it, because it is essentially village property.
Yeah, yeah.
So anything that deals with village property should just, even if they make the recommendation, you could
Right,
just.
we'd have to
Let's
sign off
ultimately
on it
approve on it.
eventually.
So,
All right, and this is for purely naming a park, the New Rochelle.
New Rochelle is
park
either
and
facilities
facilities.
or parks.
Okay.
New Rochelle actually has a separate ordinance for naming a street.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're not talking
doing
about.
that.
okay, so, yeah, so I'm
No
glad you
streets.
said that,
About parks
because
right now,
I do want to just clarify, the conversation we're having tonight is just
Parks.
about parks. It's not about facilities, because we have a number of buildings that are village-owned properties that are named in memorializing past contributors to our community. And we do have streets. In fact, since in my tenure, we've named 2 streets. And each time it's sort of like we're figuring out how to do it. So, but that's another conversation if we want to institutionalize that process or not. I hear what you're saying, Stuart, that village parks are village
Right.
property, and so the ultimate decision should come to us. But letting the rec advisory board do the
Absolutely.
consideration. Now, parks, there are a number of parks that are also named. In fact, one of them was done also in our tenure, which is the Henry Gordine Park, and that one was determined by the village board at the inception of the park. We could have called it Harbor Square Park, we could have called it Promenade Park. Those are some of the suggestions, or working titles going on. So this doesn't preclude a future village board if a new park, Crawbucky Nature Preserve, which you were on the board when that was actually named, that was just before my time. So if a new park comes to be, it's probably not going to be park on the corner of, it's probably going to have a name, but that process is not what's being considered here. This is for benches, fields, plaques, trees,
Yeah.
items within the park. That's what they're focusing on.
Yeah.
And then the one thing I want to say about corporate naming, when you first said that, I'm thinking like, City Field, and
Well,
cringing at the idea. But actually, the one
Nike.
place that I see it sometimes, I can see it, I can picture in the town park, is on the sports fields, scoreboards. Because that's something that's sort of like I assume, and I don't know what the thought process was of the administrations, and there's one at Ryder Park that has, and this is a perfect example.
Walmart bench.
It's usually it's a local business. It's not like Utz
bet you
Chips
didn't go
at the
to-
Yankee Stadium. But it's usually like a local business that says, I'm going to pay for the scoreboard. The problem is the one at Ryder Park, I've never seen it lit up. I don't think it works anymore. There's one at Lower Vets. I can't picture. I think that may have there's one in the hockey. I was thinking the one on the lower baseball field. So I guess those are kind of big ticket items, so I can see why, but this doesn't give any
Doesn't show up
flexibility
on
for
any
that.
inventory. Doesn't show up of where the money is or what, any contracts. A corporation need contracts, by the way.
Right.
Because it's a marketing thing, it's also an IRS
Yeah.
thing for them, so. I mean, are we opposed to corporations? That was not a big discussion.
I'm gonna be quite frank. I mean, New Rochelle's law seems very broad, right? It seems.
Yeah, I don't know if I love it that you have to be dead. Like, I don't know if I love that.
I
Like,
mean,
I
we
feel
can-
like you could donate
we
to
can,
somebody.
we can
you
modify that. Like you can be alive.
We're equitable.
you can be alive. You know, if we change the person being alive.
Ouch.
So what are you saying? You like the New Rochelle?
I don't think you meant what that sounded like, but okay, we know what you're talking about. Taking out that provision of the
Yeah.
requirement
So you
to
like
be
the New
deceased.
So the New Rochelle seems. I mean, because it's historical, contribution to New Rochelle. It's very broad. If someone, there's time.
Okay.
That seems fair. However, I do think that, and forgive me for thinking of revenue, but I think there's an opportunity that set outside of this conversation.
You don't have to be forgiven for that.
That we can figure out ways where people can kind of do whether it be a flower bed or a bench or
Right.
a stone or something. It could be a stone. It could be whatever the case may be.
Generally, you price these things out because the prices change, and you decide as a matter of policy. See, I think what most government agencies do is they set fees, and then you have to vote on them. But really, what other places do is they decide on the vendor. You can't do it yourself, and if something costs $50, the price becomes $100. If it costs, they keystone it because they'll just say, because there's maintenance and all that, so they'll just do it as a way that says
Similar to the way
whatever
we
it
did
costs
yeah.
us, we double it, and that should take care at least for 2-3 years of the maintenance of it. Otherwise, you start having to do price lists, and
Similar to the way we did the trees, kind of.
not really
So, but-
because the wells, no.
So I did the rec advisory board. So if we looking at the New Rochelle one, now I'm focusing on that one since Trustee Bazemore's bringing it up. But we're not requiring
ones
it
that do the
being
corporate,
deceased,
yeah.
but and they do allow for corporate, and we haven't. The rec
Figured that
advisory
out.
board didn't really talk about that.
They
and
didn't really know.
I kind of cringe at the idea, but I'm not sure exactly how it might be implemented. But the rec advisory board was focused. Our rec advisory board is much more focused on, like one of their focuses was significant participation of a coach/ref of youth programs. Well, it makes sense. That's what they're thinking of. The New Rochelle one is more broad and talks about historical significance of the person named and their historical contributions. I don't know what prompted their conversation.
Mostly
but
'cause-
somebody who coaches for a really long time and then they pass away tragically and they want to be honored at one of the fields for a generation that it's okay with me if that was their only contribution. Does that qualify as
Well, that's-
historical significance, or
They
do they have
said
to
actually
be
that's
Sunny Shore Rock or
mostly what
something?
they've heard about, or coaches, like mostly
Yeah.
people related because they're thinking fields. There are sitting parks, so I don't think they were thinking
Well,
about
it could be
that.
broader, but it doesn't have to be both. You don't have to check every box.
It's just that I think the request they get is like coaches, teachers, people who are involved with the fields, because so that's where their head was at. I'm not.
But the request that came to us was actually people who have contributed.
Yes.
in
So the
different
New
ways.
Rochelle covers that because it's more broad.
I would
I don't
like, I
think
mean,
they'd object to that.
let's say there's someone that's worked in our camp for 30 years, or the art teacher, or the ballet teacher that's been there for 10 years, or I don't know. I feel like I don't want to discourage us looking into other people that could possibly have the opportunity to be considered to be named.
Right, that's what he's
Yeah,
saying.
I'm
So
echoing.
they're
Yeah,
they're
He's
only
going
looking
for
at.
broader rather than narrow.
Yeah.
Look, I think it was a conversation that went in its own organic way, but they didn't think about every single option. But at the end of it, they did put a recommendation, and they were basically, now you guys have to.
So what Debbie came, or the rec advisory board came to us with, the specific requirement of 5 years or 10 years of resident requirement, I think it's pretty unlikely we're going to get a lot of requests of people who just moved here to have something named in their honor. It seems unlikely. What'd you say?
I said they want you to have some time in it.
Yeah, so I'm not so worried about how we set
But I
that.
do think you need look, I think the reason you want to do it is, you say that, but there are cultures and there are places where a child is born, so they want to do something like that. If you're in a rental unit and you want to plant a something, right? A lot of cultures have the planting of something. Where the heck are they going to plant it? It's not their property. So they might. So I would just say keep it broad. And what the heck does it matter to us that we say a minimum of 5 or 10 years? It's no skin off our teeth, but we'll make their life easier by giving them a little bit of a parameter. Because
Okay.
I think we have to think wider than like what we've got in the past.
So what you're saying is
I like the
skipping
idea of
past.
5 or 10 years, whichever everybody here feels. I feel like 10 years. I feel like there should be something, but you know what? It's of living
New
here.
Rochelle does 10. Everybody else seems to do 5. I don't care.
Whatever.
Um,
Doesn't matter to me.
that they listed the process as to the park superintendent for review, the rec advisory board, and then brought to the BOT, which it sounds like we're consistent, we're comfortable with that. Now what we would be broadening if we were to adopt New Rochelle is broadening the potential of people that may be considered for some sort of honorarium within the parks to certainly include what the rec advisory board is most familiar with the coaches and the youth sports folks, but then also to include folks of historical significance or making historical contributions to the community. And then the other things that New Rochelle has is a history of residence, which I thought that was already.
Once you have to be
Like
here,
your
when you
past
have to
5
be resident.
addresses?
No,
what is?
you have to be resident.
Oh, okay.
So
So but what at the top it says resident requirement for proposed honoree at least 10 years. I'm just trying to understand what
So
the
you could be
difference
a
is.
teacher for 20 years, but you don't live here, so you don't have a residence in Ossining, but you might have been a teacher, you're a coach.
They
A
would do
flower
something
for
at
you.
the school probably if that was gonna happen, so.
Okay, so then
Yes, there are other places they could do stuff, that we're not,
Yeah.
our parks are not the only place, I'm just saying.
right. So then the
Good
only
point.
question I'm not sure if rec advisory board didn't consider corporate naming. I'm not sure what.
They spoke about for like 10 seconds and moved on.
Does it make you cringe?
No, I just I just
He cringe.
I don't no. I'm not.
Okay.
I just
Because you assume it's going to be some local business anyways. Yeah.
I've had this discussion offline with Debbie because of a different case, but I think that we should separately have a conversation about corporate advertising and naming on village property, period. And what that entails, what it means, whether it's one of
I
our
feel like you have something in mind, like, do you have a specific issue?
no, but I just let's say by the waterfront, there's a train that passes by a building that faces a train.
Ah.
You know, can we have a billboard there? Can we have a sign there? Can we, if we own it, can we, I just think that it's something that we should look into. As far as the parks in general, if we allow corporate naming, there will be a lot of parameters on that too. The same thing as if in Ossining, if they were to approve, which was discussed years ago, about having banner ads on school buses. You know, what can be advertised on them, what can't. But I don't want to rule it off the table yet. I just think that's a whole, like, we could really go into discussion onto where and why and cost.
Board's approval, right? I apologize.
You know, no.
All this is at board, like the board still has to approve. We can set the parameters, but each board has to approve each person.
Well, if you set it as a policy and let the rec, like, if you say twice a year it comes before in their meetings, I'm not sure. If you set it as they have to come here for approval, then yes, I guess they would have to, because we're not legislating a law here.
Now, New Rochelle, is that a policy or a law?
I believe it's in their city code. That's where I got all this from. It's in their city code.
Yeah, I mean, we should, whether it's approval or, I mean, as you said, Bess, it's village property, whether we're labeling something we own or labeling something on the property, it's just, but I'm pretty sure that if we follow their process, it seems pretty, that's enough procurement, right? The board and then the superintendent and then us, that seems pretty,
Well, the superintendent is on the advisory. He is a part of that. He looks at things and brings it. He sets the agenda for the Parks and Rec.
So, Stuart, what I would like some clarity on is clearly we need to have some clarity on corporate naming in this
That's a
through
different
this through this category at this piece of it, but then also a lot more broadly. It sounds like some conversations have begun, but this is specifically for. This is not talking about facilities. This is not talking about the naming of a park. is this talking about, is not talking about the naming of streets. Is this, what I don't know is Market Square? It's not a park, right? Is it Parkland? No. No. Are we just talking about Parkland? Is
No, just
that,
parks.
that,
I don't want to I don't want to term it dedicated parkland because then we get into a whole other issue.
that's a state law thing, yeah.
But I was thinking more again, not the entire Market Square, but if there was a bench at Market Square or something, yeah.
I think the whole corporate is a really BOT discussion, not like appointed Parks and Rec or any other committee. But I think the parks, even the community center, I think.
Correct.
I would suggest set a parameter and.
So we're talking about, yeah, so we're not talking about the community.
Corporate stuff, if like Citibank wants to come in and name something there, like a scoreboard, it's fine with you, but I don't think we should leave it to an appointment. They might make a recommendation, but I do think on that we should decide, because there's a financial issue.
Well, because
there's
they're
a
going to have
contract.
contracts signed, and the RAB cannot be in the position of signing those
That's
contracts.
what I'm trying to say, yes. So therefore, I think that could be part of the policy, and I think that's pretty, I mean, I think what happens if it's a local, stationery store or a drugstore, not CVS, but a local something. Yeah, I could see where that might fall into, well, it's like our local gas station. We've known them and they've always been involved with baseball, whatever. That I think will be Gray, but Gray is fine. There are 2 liaisons on the committee. So I had one more question. The Parks and Rec represents town and village. So we could vote, but then how does the town come into that? Because I'm not sure how that
Well,
would
that,
work.
that's another good reason why everything finally has to be approved by
Well, I
us.
just
And the
wanted to
town
bring
board would
that
have
up.
to decide if, we all mention it to Dana and say, you guys might want to take a look at this if you haven't already.
Jackie
You know if
Shaw
they
is
have?
the other
Oh,
liaison.
yeah, Jackie Shaw, yeah.
When that comes, they would then make a decision as to whether our policy.
Can't hear him?
That when that phase comes into, then they'll determine whether it's applicable to town parks as well, right? I mean,
That'll be their determination.
yeah.
Right, so the town goes to the town vote and the village goes to us. Fine.
Correct.
I mean, I just wanted to put it out there that we just need to.
But we're looking for feedback and recommendations from the whole, well, no, from
No,
the
for
whole
the whole
rec
thing,
advisory
yeah.
board. They all sit together and consider
Oh,
things
yeah, yeah.
regardless of what side of the lines they live on. We all go to the same parks, but then we'll make the decision about village parks.
They're one of the
That's
few
our only
boards that
purview.
actually knows where all the lines of the town and the village are.
I'm sure they do. So then, Stuart, you were able to keep track of what we determined would be the terms to include in our recommended policy going forward, which is a slight broadening of what was recommended by the Rec Advisory
Yes.
Board to include some of
Yeah.
the components of the. So we want it back on a work session? Why don't you circulate it and then tell us what the procedure would be going forward? Because
Got
I
it.
think we kind of came to consensus
Okay.
on what we want to have in it. So let's
And do
see
you
what it
guys
looks
want
like.
me to speak to them the next time, let them know what's happening?
Right, so when we have a draft, then maybe send it, when do you guys meet once a month, right?
Once a month. It's on a Monday, I just don't remember which one of the month. Every Monday I have. I just don't remember which one they're on.
I'm not clear on it, and I know that we're doing this here, but at some point, whether it's rec advisory or steward. I'm not clear as to whether it's a rec advisory or steward but I think the next step is what the parameters are, like what can be named exactly, where it can be named at parks. That determination is
Oh.
it Bill that's going to be the person to determine that with the rec advisory board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
stuff
I
like
have
that.
to say that they try to get some students to do it. It's a bear. I mean, they walk around, all of a sudden they trip over some plaque that's been sitting there since 1956 that nobody knew was there. There are no records. So, I think let's not make a mountain out of a molehill. I mean, it may just be as simple as these are the 7 parks or 8 parks or 3 parks. And, I think we could put something together. And then as we do it, it has to be documented. The superintendent needs to keep it on a database and all that. And I'll talk to, we'll talk to them and see what do you guys want to do. You want to do a price list? You want to give some suggested, no, nobody could do water fountains. Nobody's doing some thing that comes with water out of it and we need pipes and stuff. I'm sure, they're totally pragmatic people.
Recycled water
Yeah.
water fountain
Well,
at
the
water
one of the
fountain that you
parks.
fill your
and
bottle in, I'd like to see that.
I would like to see that.
you want a plaque? Have a plaque.
You want to pay for that? Here you go.
I am just telling you that plumbing underground in the Hudson Valley, you are leaving a nightmare for the boards about 10 years from now. But they don't want all of that, They were keeping it very. Okay.
I would love to have a conversation about water fountains, because almost every park has one, but they're not functioning in the way that people expect them to today, and I'd love to be able to put my water bottle in it, but that's another conversation.
We can
So,
bring that up, I'm just saying for the naming.
so, and I'll pay to have one named after somebody. Oh, they don't have to be dead, right? It can be a living person that I care about. Okay, so you're gonna put together a draft for us. I think we should take a look at it. I think the rec advisory board should take a look at it, and any other questions. I'm sure there'll be more questions at that point as far as clarifying exactly the scope of what it applies to.
Okay.
And such. Okay, great. Oh, I'm so glad we finally addressed
You
this.
were
It's
right,
been
you can go
bumped
on
and
for
bumped.
hours.
I have to say it's a fun conversation, though.
Yeah.
Because you start hearing all sorts of stories, because some people know every person buried somewhere.
Yeah, I play regularly on a field that has two names. Okay, Stuart.
Thank you. Next, we have the SPCA contract with the village. I did get today from Shannon, the executive director, some numbers in terms of the breakdown over the past couple of years in terms of what they've been doing for the village. So I'm going to just pass
Yeah,
that
do you have
around.
something, I saw it come through. I was at work. I can't really do this while I'm at work, and I didn't get a chance to read it because it was late in the day when I got it, at least when I opened it.
Right. Well, I can just tell you that the contract is the same as last year's. The exception is that the spay and neutering procedures were each increased by $5.
Oh, I saw that.
But
That's
the base is the same. What I have here, though, I just want to send around. This is their, this is the intake village. This is the intake information from the SPCA for the village from 2014 through 2017. So you get an idea of, basically what they've been doing over those
They
years.
gave us last year, isn't it?
I think we just looked at it a couple weeks ago.
Right, and just so you know, in 2016, the spay and neutering fees were not $1,935, and in 2017, they were $1,850. But as I said, other than the change in the spay and neutering fees, the base contract fee remains the same for the 2018 calendar year.
Is this village or village in town?
Just village.
So there are 5 kittens right now. I better go get one.
We should all go get one, because
Well, so, and since everybody knows we're considering it, all right. So I heard it was kitten season. There are 5 there right now that have been taken in. Or they may have been adopted by now.
I'm not messing with you.
Oh my.
not messing with
I missed that emulator.
DSH cat. What does that mean? DSH cat.
I don't know.
Okay,
Where's that?
on the
On
back page.
Oh,
I'm not sure what that is. But you can see that in 2017, the total number of animals that were brought in through the village was 115, which was down 26 from the year before, and down further from 2015.
Oh.
But the number of feral cats actually increased slightly, actually by 12, but that was significantly down from 2015, where there were 73 feral cats.
It's a big year.
And,
No, seriously, something happened that year. It's like,
so
we had this conversation.
They had put all of the houses around, and then they were capturing them.
Oh, no, because we had this conversation not that long ago that we noticed there was a spike, but so nobody knew why. Do you think why?
you also, and that actually in 2015 was the heaviest year in terms of animals that were brought into the
Yeah.
SPCA.
Yeah.
So,
What is your suggestion? Should we
So
write-
what do
my
we-
recommendation is to just approve the agreement, to give Deb, do a resolution to do that
right.
for 2018, and just go forward with it.
It's easy. Yeah.
We budget for this, don't we budget for
Yes,
this?
we do.
We do.
yep. Austin's been a big, we invest in animals in our communities. So
And others don't.
go ahead,
Other
bro.
community, no, seriously, that's a real issue
true.
for me, that it's really inequitable. We don't have borders, and all these other communities that have the finances to do it, and lots of their own domesticated pets, and they do not do it, and shame on them, really.
And so I'll have a resolution.
Domestic sheltered house cat.
Well done.
I think, if I remember.
Okay, my next
Sounds
topic, and we talked about this briefly last week, relates to the agreement with Annie Rodriguez. That's going to be extended 3 months until the 5th of August. I had also sent around to you folks a copy of the ordinance that is in force now in Maplewood, New Jersey, with regard to feral cats. I think it's a very good template for what we may want to do here, particularly because it does restrict them to, they can't be on public property, they can't be on private property that's within, I think, 300 feet of a school, and there has to be proof that there's permission that they can be on that.
What about
private
eating
property.
establishments?
Uh,
That's what we've got most of the
What's the
complaints.
proximity to school concern?
I guess, because, yeah, I think, you know,
Not just school, I mean,
Well, but
that would
the-
also be
it's
really
50
any
yards of-
institution,
Yeah,
right?
well, they just have it as school and childcare centers. That's what they had here.
we're pretty, yeah, that, okay, we don't have to get into,
Yeah, I just wanted you to see what
Details of
this
it.
was.
Signs that there's no walking your pets or anything on their
No.
property, and so I would assume
This
it
is
goes
feral
hand in
cat.
hand.
this is feral cats. I'm thinking we're a really dense community, and people live like
Right on
right
top.
up against a school property. They may have a
Yep.
6-foot fence. They could have, you know, a cat shelter on the other side. Not only would most people not know it, but I don't see how that proximity would be a concern for the school. And also, any cats that are part of the feral cat TNR program, they've been spayed and neutered and vaccinated, so they're actually not a threat, and they're terrified of human contact. So you're never going to see them.
But the one thing that I put in my note to you folks is that with regard to the shelters on public property,
Yeah,
this ordinance
we saw
would have
that.
that they can't. However, we do have, with the agreement with Annie, is that we have 7 behind open door on the village property. And we currently have 3 behind a monitor.
Oh, yeah.
Those are, I discussed with Deborah Hamilton, who's an attorney who's working with the Cat Protection Council, that those need to be removed.
Yeah.
Because the fire department's made it clear that they do not want the cats there any longer. So what I've explained to Deborah is that we could consider grandfathering in the shelters that are behind open door on Brandreth, but that but they can't be at any other location on village property. So that way, at least, they're only at that one location, but nowhere else.
That's been extended, correct?
What about the old DPW? She's a number of them there.
Not under my agreement, she doesn't. She does, and she's contrary.
When did
She
that
was
happen?
over
Those
them-
were there before
Yep,
this
but that-
came up.
Okay, because I did the agreement like 6 months ago, and that was never part of it.
They shouldn't
Talk
be there.
offline.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, we will.
Does the Maplewood, New Jersey address or any of the programs? I know some of the questions that come up, which is really what's made the fire department, the fire company, a little uncomfortable having them there. Is that is there a best practice for feeding these animals so that it does not attract raccoons and other vermin?
It's in there, isn't
For
it?
example, they do have this in the Maplewood. One is that for example, it provides that food for feral cat colonies shall not be provided in a manner that attracts cats not in the colony or provides food for rodents, raccoons, or other animals. Food shall be removed within 1 hour.
1 hour. That's actually the big challenge.
So that's one of the issues that they have there to basically do that. The other thought is, and what they have in Maplewood is they have the process whereby the folks who operate these shelters are essentially, if you want to call it, registered with the municipality. And what that means is, and they work with, in here they work with a sponsoring organization. We might suggest the Cat Protection Council of Westchester to effectively, they train these people, they deal with these people. What's interesting is they have a provision in Maplewood that the sponsoring organization has to have its own insurance. So basically that if someone gets injured while taking care of the cats or, near a cat colony, that's an insurance policy you can basically deal with, so which is not bad. But the idea of basically these folks come in, they're essentially registered to do this. This is a particular colony that they're working with, but they have to go through training. There's a requirement here that they have certain training that they would have to go to. That's, and I can tell you from my discussions with Ms. Hamilton, that's something the Cat Protection Council would be happy to do, to basically work in the sense of training with these folks. The other thing that they're working on is, we currently obviously use the SPCA to do the spaying and neutering. They are working on an arrangement with veterinary tech program and veterinarians at Mercy College, where students are basically learning a lot of that. And it would be done for a nominal fee. In other words, not the $55 and $40 that is charged here. There's no exclusivity under the SPCA agreement. So it's just a thought that's there. It's not something
Oh,
that's in place yet.
That's
But
interesting.
it is something that, they had someone who gave a speech, a talk recently at the rec center, and she's a professor and she's a veterinarian at Mercy College, and she is, amenable to working that up so that we could bring our cats down there if we had to.
What I like is the accountability, because if I recall some of the he said, she said that went around, the police department, our own experts, took up a lot of energy and exceedingly negative energy. So if we could eliminate that challenge by accountability of people, I mean, you take a video, if it says food has to be removed, but it's there for 3 hours, then, they're in like breach of
Right.
whatever you want to call it. And then we have to take action because doing our best to accommodate everybody. And I love that about this. That to me was the big winner.
What I would like to do, because the agreement with Annie runs until now August the 5th, is before we get to that date to have an ordinance to present to you folks, so that we don't have to extend hers, but we basically can start at that point going forward, and basically have something on the books that specifically deal with the feral cats.
So I just have a question. This particular ordinance says that feral cats can't be on village property, the one that you have.
Well, what it would be is that you can't feed them.
Okay.
You can't have feeding stations or shelters on municipal-owned property.
Okay. So if we were to pass this tomorrow, will we effectively be telling Annie that she can no longer do what she's been doing?
Well, what I would say is this: to the shelters that are behind open door, I would propose to grandfather those in so that she would not have to move those.
Indefinitely?
Right.
Okay.
Because the idea is that ultimately you're going to reach a point where there shouldn't be any more.
Okay.
But as to the ones that are at Monitor, behind Monitor, those I've indicated have to be removed, and they really have to start that process now, because simply put, the fire department doesn't want them there any longer.
Okay.
Can they be transferred behind open door?
You don't want to do that.
You don't have to answer that. No, it's just a
So-
question that, just
You
saying.
really don't want to do
So
We don't
I
believe.
just want to make sure that before we make sure that we talk to our own animal patrol,
Sure.
because if we have a law and then we grandfather certain things and then someone chooses to enforce the law, but then there was a decision to grandfather something, and then I just want to
You want to include the police department and animal control
absolutely
into what we're
absolutely,
proposing at this
particularly
stage.
where
Of
we're
course.
where we're going
Exactly.
forward.
And document everything.
And because I just think it's important.
Well, part of this is documenting because he's
We talk about
videotaping
it
the whole
often
thing.
about having laws and then
Yeah, no, it's
an enforcement
totally
issue.
That'll be done.
everybody involved. I mean, including the fire because property, etc. So no school, no this. Okay.
But I'll have that for you to, at a future work session, so we can discuss what it will look like for Ossining, and then it can,
Let's try and do it in one of the May work sessions because the June and July ones,
That's
this
fine.
is kind of like a standalone item. It wouldn't,
Understood.
kind of detract from that
Okay.
environment. All right.
Last is cabaret application for La Serenita's Lounge at 12 Croton Avenue has been approved by both police and building department. They are looking for Sunday through Thursday, which is what they had before, and it would be midnight till 2 a.m. Excuse me, Thursday through Sunday.
That makes more sense.
Sorry. All right,
Is this a new owner?
No.
This is a renewal?
Yeah, they've had it before. Took them a few
And
times
the
to
police
pass.
said fine.
Police, Lieutenant Damiano signed off, yes.
You have some questions? Do you want to follow up with the police department and find out what their reports were? Because we didn't look at their reports, we just took their recommendation.
Yeah, I have quite a few concerns. I'm going to say they're alleged concerns about the establishment as a whole. So if we can follow up the police department, that'd be great.
Well, we'll have the chief here next week, at the legislative, so if you want to, you can discuss it
All
with
right,
him
because
at that point.
so at the legislative
If
you
that
could
works
do all
okay,
that.
and then If you guys are satisfied, I can have a resolution ready, and if you're not, we don't have, we just don't have to entertain the resolution. Simple as
Thanks.
that.
That sounds good.
Okay? The last is the one-day event permit, which unfortunately I do not have any.
Cabaret, it's not an event permit, cabaret.
Excuse me. Whatever, the one-day
I don't,
permit.
I don't want to call that though.
Okay, I can just tell you, I don't have any information on it, so if we can put that off to our next session, that would
Okay.
help me out,
All right.
because I'm in the blind.
Right, because she's not, okay, yeah.
That sounds great. We don't have any,
No executive and no
nothing.
advisory.
Okay. All right.
What's
A
the matter?
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you next week at the Birdsall Fagan Police Car Facility. Jamie, what did we forget? Stuart, what did we forget? Oh. All right. This meeting is adjourned. Now we're off.